Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to the New Jersey Globe's 2023 primary live stream. Kind of part two. We did one for filing day. Now this is the real deal. The primary is next Tuesday. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. I think Micah does, but hundreds of thousands of people have already cast their votes. Hundreds of thousands more will. We've got mail votes. We've got early votes starting tomorrow. We've got election day on Tuesday. It's all very exciting, and we've got hundreds, maybe not hundreds, a little more than 100 contests statewide that are happening. So I'm Joey Fox, New Jersey Globe reporter. To my left is my boss, David Wildstein. And to my right is, I've copied and pasted this a billion times, the director of the Rebovich Institute for New Jersey Politics at Rider University, Micah Rasmussen.
Almost perfect. Rebovich.
Damn it.
No Rebovich. Yeah.
So welcome, everyone. This will hopefully be a fun time. This will hopefully also be a time that finishes within a reasonable hour, but we won't hold ourselves or you to that. So let's start it off with, before we jump into individual contests, which there are a lot of, let's talk briefly about what the statewide picture is looking like, and especially what turnout is looking like. And I know that Micah is very much the guru in that, so I will let him take over.
Yeah, the first question you ask in any race is how many votes do you need to win? And you look at historical numbers, turnout from the past. And if we look at that, we're looking at roughly between 8 and maybe 10% optimistically of total registered voters who will turn out in a state legislative primary for the state legislature being the top of the ticket. So what that translates to is between 500,000 and 600,000 votes total. Statewide, Republican and Democrat. We've got just over 200,000 votes in by vote by mail already as of now. And starting tomorrow, as you said, Joey, we're going to have 3 days of in-person early voting. If history is a guide there, we'll get maybe 40,000 votes out of that. So that'll bring us to about 240. And the balance, maybe another 300,000 votes, will come on election day. I'm willing to believe that that could be a little bit higher because a lot of the races we're going to be talking about tonight are on the Republican side. And we know that Republican voters, at least for now, still have a preference for voting in person on election day. So we'll see how that goes. But that's how I think the 500,000 or 600,000 shakes out.
And so, oh, sorry, go ahead, David.
No, I just want to say this is now the first election under the new map. And it's been 12 years since New Jersey's had one, and that map, when we came on and did this right after that map was approved, we were talking about a path, a tough one, a reach, but a path to a Republican majority. I think Republicans will also admit that's less realistic now, but a chance to make some gains, and probably important to point out that in the districts where Republicans would be looking to gain, the seat that is most easily achievable for them is District 4, and that's where we have the primary, and and we'll talk about that a lot. But that is, that's probably one of the key ones to watch in the state. Mikey, you talked about 200,000 votes already cast in 2019, just sort of the earliest days of vote by mail in New Jersey. Statewide in the primary was 111,000. So that really does show for both parties. It evinces an embracement of this new system. It's been slower by some than others, and then early voting, and I'll wind up saying it anyway, so might as well say it up front. This evening, Brian Stack sent me photos of his campaign headquarters preparation for going out and getting early voters in Union City, where he's unopposed, and he's still doing an army, and he's still going to go out there and work it. So what you're seeing is in Hudson County, people embracing this early voting. So I think that's going to make a big difference.
So one other question that I've got before I move on to individual races about turnout is I think when it comes to general elections, we have clear ideas about what different turnout levels mean. High turnout means that everybody's very engaged in the election, and it's oftentimes used synonymously with Democrats doing well, although it doesn't always happen. You can look at individual party registrations and how many mail ballots they've cast or whatever, and you can draw conclusions about how a general election might go. What do you look for in a primary election in terms of turnout, and what would different turnout levels on Tuesday really mean? Like, what is the significance of talking about this?
I think this is all local, and this is, you talk about a legislative district, but there's a lot of factors to turnout. I always think one of the most important things is to look at whether there's local primaries and whether the turnout is being driven from the bottom up. We are seeing, and I'm hearing more and more about legislators facing challenges to be known these days. So you have a ballot that's headed by candidates for the legislature. Some have been there a very long time, some brand new, some open seats, but people don't know these names. So I think it might be the local level, and you could look at a district and say, well, candidate A should win, except that candidate B's towns come out more heavily, and that'll shift the race. It's I guess the most important thing is sort of being Captain Obvious here. It's not just how many people turn out, but it's where they come from.
Right. The other thing, if you want to generalize, and this is a dicey one, I agree with you, David, that the towns will tell you the most of the story, because we know that a mayor of a town, of Chester, for example, if you get a strong vote out of Chester, that bodes well for the mayor of Chester, right? That we can assume that is probably the case. But generally, if the parties are operating on a status quo model of low turnout, and let's face it, they are, and you see a big turnout, a surge in some place, and you're looking to identify where they might be from, that means one of two things. It means something outside of the status quo is happening. It means the challengers have really excited a group of voters, or it means that the machine has been scared into action, right? So that's generally what I read as a surge.
I agree.
All right, so are we ready to jump into individual contests?
Sure.
Okay, so yeah, we've got obviously a cool slide here. Before I really begin, though, I'll just say that I made a document a couple weeks ago that lists every contested primary in the state, and we've linked to that document both at the bottom of the story that includes this live stream, and it's in the YouTube description. You may have to reload your YouTube to find it, but it's there. So if you want to follow along and see exactly who and what we're talking about, so we're not just sort of talking into the ether, please do that. But I don't think that anybody who is watching this live stream will really need that for the 3rd legislative district, because this is the most well-known primary in the state. It involves one of the most shockingly well-known people, Senator Ed Durr, who obviously won in a massive upset in 2021. He defeated Senate President Steve Sweeney, and he is facing his own running mate this year. You've got her picture below him there, Beth Sawyer. She has argued that he is just, whatever his celebrity may be, he has not been an effective legislator. She is running on a message of delivering for the district where he has not. He is running on a message of, hey, I'm the guy who's been delivering for this district for the past 2 years, and I'm the one who beat the Senate president, and what are you even doing? And it's a really interesting primary. So I think, David and I, we've had many discussions about this primary, and when we were talking about it in January, the tone of our conversations was very much, wow, it sure seems like Durr might be in trouble from a primary challenger. Sawyer was not running against him yet, but from a primary challenger. David, do you think that that's still where things are at in this race right now?
Yeah, this was a rocky start for those in Gloucester County that didn't want to see Ed Durr continue in the Senate. It started out with Mickey Ostrom, the Salem County Commissioner. He was in the race. Durr won some conventions. Ostrom got out, and Beth Sawyer, who was supposed to run with Ostrom, decided to plunge into the Senate race. I think one of the interesting things here is there's not a lot of money being spent from both sides in this race. This this is primarily, and Joe, you could walk through the numbers, but primarily Gloucester County. Durr has the line in all three counties, but I don't know what the line will mean when they're full lines. Both candidates have county commissioner and surrogate candidates, so they're not giving the impression that they're far off. Nobody's in ballot Siberia this year, and I think that matters. Sawyer has been underestimated before. We all talk about this upset victory, that Ed Durr scored, but Beth Sawyer had an upset victory too. She beat John Bersagelli, the chairman of the Assembly Appropriations Committee, 10-term guy. one of Steve Sweeney's closest friends, and now he's waiting for the results of this primary. This is, Democrats want to flip this district back, and I think the money here is important. I think we're going to see whether Durr's grassroots celebrity is translating into votes. It very well may be that case.
You mentioned ballot position, and even though Durr has the line in Gloucester, Beth Sawyer has column A in Gloucester. Her column has the first position. And so we've talked about this many times before. There are times when you're running a full slate and you'll pull the first position that your slate is before their slate, the regular slate, and it actually winds up sort of minimizing the effect of the line. This could be one of those times. This is one of those circumstances where two things have to happen if you don't have the line. One, you have to have a full slate. Two, you have to draw the better position. And that's what she's done in both cases. So this could minimize the effect of the line in Gloucester, which is the lion's share of the district, as you can see on the map.
And there's also, in Salem County does not have a line at all. Right. Durr has the endorsement of the county party, but on the ballot, he and Sawyer, he's got whatever the official line is in Salem. I forget what it is. Salem County Republicans or something. And then Sawyer has Salem County Republican Party. So in both Gloucester and Salem, Durr and his running mates can't count on just people saying, oh, well, there's the line, so I'm going to vote the line. That's not enough. But I think what might be enough is, well, okay, I've got these two candidates who appear pretty much similar on the ballot, but Ed Durr is the guy who I've seen on Twitter or in the news, or he's the one who I know is fighting for me in Trenton. I mean, it's unfortunate for Beth Sawyer because, as David mentioned, she pulled off just as much of an upset as Durr did in 2021. I think she got more votes than he did, but she has not become the celebrity from this district. Durr is. And that ultimately might be the determining factor here in a race that in most of the district kind of approximates an open primary. He has more name recognition. He does have more money, even though it's not that much. And he is positioning himself as the sort of conservative warrior. And that's usually a pretty winning recipe in the Republican Party. It's also worth mentioning quickly that in Cumberland County, there's no such confusion. Durr very much has the line. He's running a Cumberland County politician on his ticket, which would give Cumberland a second legislator in Trenton. Right now, they only have Mike Testa. So that little extra 10%, if the race is close in the other two counties, Cumberland providing like a 75-25 margin for Durr, which I think is very possible, could be his savior.
Yeah, Mike Testa is not conflicted about this race at all. I asked him when he was at Ryder just before the semester ended, what do you think of 3 and 4? And he said 4, he has no problem with. That's an open primary. Go for it. Do what you want to do there. He's got no qualm about that. 3, well, first of all, 3 is in his county, but 3 he viewed as what he called an unhealthy primary where the incumbent is being challenged. And he thought that was what you don't do. He thought that was a violation of Ronald Reagan's 11th commandment. And he thought that he has no qualms about putting the organization solidly behind Durr in Cumberland. It's only 10% of the district, but for what it's worth, if you get a big number out of that, one of the things we're going to be talking about over and over again tonight is if the turnout in a Republican primary total in an individual district is 5,000 or 6,000, then swing of a couple of hundred is going to make a big difference.
Yeah. And we've seen primaries before where you look at the counties that are the biggest in the district and you think, well, this is going to be determinative of the victor. But then it ends up being the primary that comes to mind first is the 11th congressional district primary last year, where Typhoon Selin won both Morris and Essex counties in the primary, which are like the vast majority of the district. But because he did so only like sort of middlingly, whereas Paul DeGroot won Passaic County by a ridiculous margin, and that was enough for him to win overall. And so these math things don't seem like they would work out, but then occasionally they do work out exactly like that. And you really want to get votes wherever you can, whenever you can. So I think that we've got more to say about South Jersey, but I think some of it can be said in the next district.
Well, let's talk about I want to talk about the assembly also.
Oh yes, sorry. Go ahead. Yes, please do.
So this is you're talking about one incumbent, Beth Ann McCarthy Patrick, running for her second term. She was Beth Sawyer's running mate. She also stunning upset victory in that race. Beth Sawyer's they're not running a second assembly candidate. They're not at all interested in touching that incumbent. I think this one to me is clearer. That Beth Ann McCarthy Patrick is going to win. Mm-hmm. The first spot in the three-way race, and
it's also quickly worth noting that she is the only Salem County candidate in the race and the only Salem politician in the legislature. So that I don't know whether that has much of an electoral advantage. We'll see, but that's meaningful. Salem it's a small county. It's in many places a very poor county. So she is their rep.
She is, and she's the first legislator from Salem County since Jack Collins, who was speaker, and his nephew is running for the assembly on the Sawyer ticket. I think we talked about this on filing day. I think we all agreed, having the name Collins 22 years later, a common name like that is not, anywhere close to being an advantage. He hasn't raised money.
There's a way to transfer that, by the way. You've got to get cable ads with Jack Collins saying, come vote for my nephew. And that hasn't happened.
I would argue, 22 years is a long time. It'd be like, and I'm going to age myself here, like the old American Express. You don't know me, but I'm William Miller. I ran for Vice President of the United States in 1964. Collins would have to, he wouldn't just have to say, this is my nephew, but he'd have to educate people on who he used to be.
Right.
And I just, I think this is clear that the organization-backed assembly candidates, I think they're going to win. I'd be shocked if it was any different. And then the other thing I just want to point out is 2019, which is the year we look at to compare turnout. This is forgotten because they had no chance, but the two Republican assembly candidates against John Bersicelli and Adam Taliaferro in 2019 were Ed Durr and Beth Sawyer running together, and they got about 3,000 votes. So we're not talking about huge turnout if those numbers are at all consistent with. And Mike, I don't know how many in the third have voted in the Republican early voting in the Republican primary, but
1,500.
Yeah. So you've already had half the turnout of 19 has already voted. Yeah. But you're talking about a race where hundreds of votes can be a landslide, not thousands.
Right.
So Joe, you want to go to?
Well, now I want to add a quick fun fact about Beth Sawyer, since you brought up the 2019 race, which is that she actually didn't initially run in 2021 at all. I forget what his name was, but the third district Republicans had a different candidate who dropped out for reasons I can't remember. And after the filing deadline, and Sawyer stepped in just so that they would still have a full slate. And she ran a write-in campaign to get onto the ballot at all. And then obviously that may be the most successful write-in primary campaign of the last 20 years in New Jersey politics. So I just think that's kind of a fun tidbit because none of us, including at the New Jersey Globe, were really paying that much attention to what Republicans were doing in the 3rd district in the 2021 primary. We didn't know yet that whoever won that primary was going to be a big deal come November.
Right. I look at it. Micah will remember these days, but I sort of liken this district to Dick LaRosa's win over Jerry Stockman in a Trenton Ewing district in Mercer County, and then Stockman came back to try and get his old seat back after 2 years, and LaRosa beat him, and that became a 6-year stint in the Assembly in the Senate. So, this is a big deal, going into the general, and I do think we should talk about, especially as we talk about these primaries, what the impact is on party unity after some very divisive races, and you can say it's hard to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, except that we have a history, not just in New Jersey, but all over the nation, where primaries are a slugfest. And by the fall, for the most part, that doesn't spill over to rank and file voters.
There's 2 things that I want to mention before we move on. One is, I will never understand putting together a slate. And sometimes stuff happens. Your second candidate drops out, or you don't find one, you don't get somebody to do it. But the math you're kind of hindering yourself when you allow that second vote of your supporters to go somewhere else, right? Unless they bullet vote, the people who go in and vote for Collins are gonna vote a second vote for somebody else, right? And so you're kind of making the task harder for yourself by not giving them that second vote somewhere to go. It's going to go to, in many cases, it's going to go to one of your opponents. That's one thing. The other thing is, I think Beth Sawyer has a decent answer for Durr's celebrity, and it's a novel and it's an interesting argument. I don't know if it's going to carry the day. I have my doubts, but she's at least answering it. She's saying, look, this is a guy who's more interested in fighting the culture stuff and not going and being a serious legislator. He has not been the guy who's fought for you in Trenton. He has not gotten anything done. I've done the grunt work of constituent relations. I've done the grunt work of sponsoring the bills. I'm the effective legislator in the mix. He's not. He hasn't gotten anything done. You should look at results. And so we'll see whether that carries any weight.
Yeah. And look, in a race like this, too, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, celebrity may carry more weight there.
It might, but it's also very possible that Republicans in the 3rd district say, there's a lot of legislators working on legislation, and these are all freshmen, so a lot of them don't have their names on a lot of bills in the minority, but maybe Republicans want a senator, maybe they want Ed Durr talking about these cultural issues, and maybe they're not as concerned about how he got 7 bills passed in his first term, more concerned that he's talking about things that nobody else is talking about.
Yeah. Judging by the other races across the state, I would have to say you're right. I would have to say that Republicans are more interested in having somebody standing up and fighting on these issues. Yeah.
Or at least a few thousand Republicans who turn out for these primaries.
Right.
Yeah.
So should we move on to number 4?
Yes.
So I think that this is now a little bit old, but divisiveness was very much the perfect segue into this district, because this is the nastiest primary in the state, I think, by a long shot. You've got Chris Del Borello, who's a former Washington Township councilman. He's the guy on the top there. He has the line in Camden and Atlantic. And then you've got Nick DeSilvio, who's a Gloucester County commissioner. He's got the line in Gloucester. DeSilvio is kind of the initial, well, I guess it'll be him candidate when the Gloucester GOP started leaning towards him. But then Atlantic County sort of rebelled and started pushing for an alternative. They found one in Del Borello, and they've kind of had nothing but a bunch of good results since then. Atlantic convinced Camden County, or I guess not Atlantic, but Del Borello convinced Camden County to flip the line over to him after originally giving it to DeSilvio. I'm going to get these names mixed up constantly. And you've got this, and also Del Borello, like Sawyer, because they're associated in Gloucester County, has column A. He's got this full slate. He's got a slate that basically makes it look like he might have the line too. So you've got the situation where DeSilvio has the line in about half the district, Del Borello has the line in about half the district, but Del Borello has more money and Del Borello has a sort of pseudo line in Gloucester. And what DeSilvio has done instead is run kind of as hard to the right as he can within reason in a competitive district. And if you saw our primary debate between these two, you'll sort of know the dynamics. And part of the dynamics are very much that these two people do not like each other and will say so at any given opportunity. So yeah, that was a sort of slapdash nonsensical overview of this primary. But what are you both looking at in these results? Who do you think has the upper hand?
Well, in addition to the cash that's been spent so far by the campaigns, you're right, it's advantage Del Borello. Cash on hand that's left as of 11 days pre is also advantage Del Borello, 32,000 to 7,000. But the other thing that's been really interesting is that the operating engineers, of which Matt Walker, one of the assembly candidates, is on the executive board of that union. They have spent almost $300,000 in this district on their behalf, and so it further exacerbates the financial advantage that Del Borello's tickets had.
And one of the things that I looked at early in this race is before you even listen to these candidates, and you learn a lot, in watching the debate and watching them interact with each other, but they both got good stories. DeSilvio was a Navy veteran and, who became involved in his community because he had a special needs child and ran for the school board and then ran for county commissioner and won an upset victory for that, first Republican win in Gloucester in a while. Del Borello is a former Washington Township councilman, biggest town in Gloucester County, second biggest town in the district. He was a guy who was, in school to become a medical assistant, and the family business, which became a big part of this campaign, but the family business experienced some problems, and they called him back and they said, we need you to come in and we need you to help straighten out this mess. So they both have compelling stories. One of the things that I think one of the first things that I'm going to look for on election night is what happens in Washington Township. Mm-hmm. And is Del Borello, whose brother is now a councilman, is Del Borello, who has this base of having grown up in Gloucester, if he's winning or even coming close in Washington Township, that might just be an indication of where this race is going. And I agree with Joey. These two guys, they hate each other. This is sort of, you got to imagine Paul Moriarty. He's just sitting back and he's enjoying this because there's nothing bad for him that they're depleting financial resources to win a nomination. But, and this is to me a very important but, is that primaries aren't always bad because it's an opportunity for candidates with low or no name identification to build name ID. People are seeing their ads, they're watching their campaign, and while they'll finish the election, the primary election, with some negatives because of all these attacks, they're still also known. And one thing, and I'll mention he who shouldn't be named, but I remember Chris Christie saying to me after the 2009 gubernatorial campaign, he doesn't know if he would have beaten John Corzine if he had not had a primary with Steve Lonegan, serious enough to make him hone his skills and work at it and build the organization. That sort of spring training of a general election, he always said was what made him a better general election candidate and able to beat an incumbent governor, not by a whole lot. So I think they might be looking at that also. And then Joey and Mike had talked about the assembly race. I mean, you've got you've got some good prospects here too. Young candidates. Walker, a veteran, coming out of Atlantic County. Atlantic is small, but he's got the that organization in the Bunas that are going to be cranking out votes. I'm going to look to see whether that's going to be more than 7% of the turnout or not. And you've got a lot of people that are stakeholders here. Even Jackie Vigilante, the county chair, she's backing Ed Durr and Nick DeSilvio. She at the very least needs a split here. Winning 2 would be huge for her. Losing 2 would be a disaster for her. So there are a lot of stakeholders here, and the International Union of Operating Engineers, Local 825, is probably the biggest stakeholder. They're to me not just broadcasting that they want one of their guys in the assembly, but they're also saying we're here to stay for the general. And if you're impressed by the numbers that we're putting in, the money we're putting into the primary, just wait till you see what we're doing here. So 825 is probably the only organization in the state that could even approach trying to be competitive financially with the South Jersey Democratic Organization.
That was a really interesting way of thinking about it, David, because we've talked a lot about how South Jersey is changing fast and is becoming more Republican. And this race, more than any other, you see 6 fresh faces who are maybe the future of the party. None of them have run at this level before, and you can almost see the bench coming to life here. You can really see some depth coming for the party in this part of the state, which is interesting. I'm struck by their differences on abortion because, now granted, South Jersey, again, is a more conservative place than the rest of the state. This is, being pro-life is not a liability in this part of the state by any means. But DeSilvio has taken a 6-week stance, no abortions after 6, or maybe 4, 8. He's very, very very aggressive on that. Del Borello told you at his debate, 15 weeks maybe. So in terms of what's palatable in the general election, you can certainly see where Del Borello has the position that may appeal more in the general. Certainly in the primary, you're going to, the more conservative you can get, the better. But looking ahead, Del Borello may have the more palatable position.
Micah, 3,000 votes cast in 19 in this district. How many Republican ballots have been returned so far?
It's under it's 1,100 in that range. Yeah. So, but this is one where I think you're going to see more votes this
actually time. I'm looking now. Looks to be, and again, I should have started this out. Shout out to Ryan Dubicki of the Associated Press, who
what do you got?
Who every single day goes through these lists of vote by mail returned, and he's the state
is the one,
or for him. So 2,570 Republican ballots so far returned in the 4th district, and in 2019, 3,000 votes in total.
Yeah. So this is one where
that's the old 4th district that was significantly more
Democratic. The old 4th, that's true.
So there are fewer Republicans, or there are more Republicans now in the district to begin with. So that's an important distinction.
This is one of those districts we talked about early on where, and you talked about Washington Township, but, given that the Del Borello family has extensive outreach there, this is one of those things where if you see a big cranking turnout in Washington Township, you can have a sense that that they're really cranking the numbers out there. They're going above and beyond what we would see historically for the norm for Republican turnout in the district.
So two things in response to various different points that you guys have both made. One, on the point of electability, I think that you've got some pretty strong evidence of who South Jersey Democrats see as more electable. They are meddling in the primary what they're doing is they're directly attacking Del Borello, saying that he's a crook and a criminal and I don't know, whatever, which we haven't even touched on that there's some crazy attacks coming from sides. Del Borello's family company and DeSilvio's social media posts, and I honestly don't even want to get into all of it. But that's a whole element of this primary. But South Jersey Democrats are spending an unknown amount of money to bash Del Borello.
They're trying to pick their opponent.
An attempt clearly at primary meddling to try to pick their opponent and to get DeSilvio, who they think is less electable. And if Del Borello wins, they're getting some free hits in right now while everyone's paying attention. So either way, it's a strategy that is designed to keep this district in their hands. But I do think it's interesting how clear of a gambit this is to get DeSilvio across the finish line, someone who they clearly view as less electable. And DeSilvio and his allies haven't really responded to this or condemned this or anything like that. I mean, it's a little bit of a, I don't know, they're kind of just letting it happen to a certain extent, from what I can tell, which I can understand. If someone's attacking your opponent for you, then that's a good thing for you, regardless of what their intentions are. And then the other point that I want to make is about Jackie Vigilante and the Gloucester County organization, because Gloucester County Republicans have had a really good 2021. They had a somewhat disappointing 2022, but clearly they are on the up and up as a party. They have a senator that they didn't have before. They have county commissioners that they didn't have before. They have everyone in the state who follows these things closely knows that Gloucester is now a competitive county and Republicans can really do things. The question this year is whether that Republican organization can actually do what it wants and needs to do in the primary. Is this organization that has proven it can win general elections in these big upsets, can it pick and choose its preferred candidates and get them across the finish line? And I think where you're going to see that the most in the sort of baseline for that is there are 3 county commissioner seats and the surrogate's office that are up this year. And both slates, the Sawyer Del Borello slate and the DeSilvio Durr slate, have full slates of candidates. And so the question of, regardless of these individual dynamics in these Senate and Assembly races, how are people going to approach this sort of even-handed ballot with a bunch of commissioner and surrogate candidates they've probably not heard of before? How is that going to play out?
And to David's point, looking at those numbers from the past, that's something they've never done before, right? There's not a lot of experience with primary turnout operations in this district, in this county, in this part of the state. It's just not something they've had to do in the past. So can they get up to speed?
Right.
Yeah. And I depending on the closeness and some of these candidates for county office in Gloucester, they do come with bases. Some of them are former local elected officials or current local elected officials. Jim Philbin is a former county chairman. He's Adam Wingate ran for county commissioner last year. These are off the line candidates. Maybe with more bases than the ones on the line. So, if this is close at the top of the ticket, I wouldn't be surprised if there was a split. It doesn't mean they're all going to win. You could have a couple people from each slate running together, and right. If I were Del Borello or DeSilvio, I don't know if I'd mind that. I don't know if secretly they're not going to say it, but I wouldn't know. I wouldn't be surprised if secretly they're saying, "Wow, wouldn't it be great if our ticket won 2 of the 3, and we had a running mate who might have to bring in everybody else. That might help unite the party."
Yeah, good point.
But I don't think you could plan this out. Unless Mickey Quinn and Michael Mueller are trying to pick the candidates for county commissioner. You never know.
So one other thing before I move on from South Jersey, and I just forgotten to bring this up when we were on LD3. There's actually a Democratic primary in the 3rd district as well.
Yeah,
right. We should at least briefly touch on. So former Assemblyman John Berzicelli is running for the Senate, and he's got running mates Heather Simmons and Dave Bailey. But they've got a full slate of primary challenges. You've got Mario DeSantis, who ran against Donald Norcross last year. You've got he's for the Senate. You got Tansy Youngblood, who ran against Van Drew in 2018. Yep. She actually probably has the highest name recognition of the bunch because that primary, she didn't come really close, but she definitely made some news for being the anti-Van Drew candidate. And you've got a newcomer named Robert Fitzpatrick. Do you see that race as competitive at all, or at least worth following at all?
I do not. I do not. I mean, I think
I
it's,
don't either.
I think it's going to be a blowout, and I'm sorry, Mario DeSantis, for saying this, but boy, that is one tough name these days to have in a Democratic primary.
He's actually done a pretty good job about branding around that. He is the good DeSantis.
Yeah, but this is going to be a blowout. I mean, this is, and I have to admit, I'm going to say this. This is going to be a blowout, says the guy who thought Sweeney was going to coast to re-election in that same district.
Well, we've talked about this. Sometimes it's not just the line. The line comes coincidental with other things like resources, right? So when you have one side that has all the resources, and when you have one side that has all the organization support, and one side that has the line, and one side that has the experience and the names that you know and the track record, then that all adds up to the rationale for why the line happened, and it all works to Berzicelli's team's advantage.
Yeah, and look, it's worth pointing out that I don't think these are competitive. This is a competitive primary, and Moriarty is unopposed, but over 6,000 early votes have already been cast in the third, and over 7,500 in the fourth. So the Camden County, and I'll
That's it.
Name George Norcross's early endorsement of vote by mail before anybody else was convinced of it. They're not in year 1 or 2; they are in year 6 or 6 of saying, let's get our votes in early. Let's not depend upon election day. And you're seeing numbers there. I mean, we're not going to go through every district, but I just want to read something. So in the 6th district, where Jim Beach and Lou Greenwald and Pam Lampett are, over 11,000 votes have been cast. Over 8,000 in District 5, where there's no race, 7,500 in District 4, and 6,000 in District 3. There are no districts in the state that even come in anywhere near that. I mean, this is South Jersey Democrats figured this out early. They've got a well-oiled, no pun intended, machine when it comes to early voting. And I'll jump way ahead here, and I promise you, Joey, I won't say much about it. But when you are doing 2025 Democratic gubernatorial primary math, don't look at just how many Democrats live in South Jersey. Look at the advantage that South Jersey Democrats have in producing high voter turnout in a primary.
And so there's 2 things I would say about that. One, Middlesex County has gotten really good at the vote by mail game as well. They don't mobilize it year in and year out the way that the South Jersey Democrats do. They are in the regular practice of doing this in every election, and their voters are in the practice of doing this in every election. So the point is, we don't know how these 6,000 people who voted, these 6,000 Democrats. However, we do know that they are people who are part of that Camden turnout machine, and so they're predisposed. I think we can fairly assume that they are on board with.
Well, they all are. They're all getting there, and and it's interesting because you can, as we're in the early, still the early days of people voting. I have to tell you, I had this conversation with somebody today. I don't know if we should call this. I don't know if we're wrong calling saying there's an election day. I don't know if it's really an election day. I think June 6th is the final day to vote.
Yeah.
In a primary that's been going on for a long time. I think we're gonna get to a point in the future where I'll say election day and people will say, "What's that?" The way people say to me, "What's an absentee ballot?" It might all change, but in these early days, you can almost sort of trace it too. I mean, I talked about Mickey Quinn earlier, who's George Norcross's top political guy. When they were all getting along, he went up to Middlesex and help them, sort of learn how to do this. And he was one of the people who taught, Edie Delgado, one of the best operatives in the state. And then she went up and she taught it to Brian Stack. So, you're sort of seeing, the gospel of early voting spread, and you can sort of track who's putting it together and who's good at it and who's still learning.
Yeah.
And by the way, who's still learning, but they are learning, and this is on the map, we talked about this right before the program started, is the New Jersey Republicans. The NJGOP is on the road. They are teaching their people around the state how to do this and why it's important. They realize that they're behind the 8 ball, and they're catching up, and they will play the game. They are a number of years behind, but they will get up to speed. Adaptation takes, maybe 5 years or so. They're now realizing that they have to invest in this process.
Which every time a Republican like Donald Trump says the vote by mail is rigged, they have to just cringe inside. Be like,
Yep.
That's not what we're going for here.
Exactly.
Yeah. And look, Bob Hugin, the Republican state chairman, to his credit, he was, very quickly saying, no, we're crazy if we don't play by the rules that are set and leave votes on the table. And Republicans are getting better at it.
And Jack Ciattarelli said last year, you can trust that this is a way you can vote securely. So they realize that they have to get up to speed, and they are finally doing the work.
All right, I'm going to break us away from South Jersey. We have a couple more very interesting primaries upstate, but first I am going to go in numerical order because that's how my brain works. I'm going to run through a few other primaries, and the way this is going to work is they're mostly pretty boring. David and Micah, stop me if you have something interesting to say. I imagine you won't. So in the 12th district, we've got an assembly primary that is, you got 2 incumbents, Rob Clifton and Alex Sawicki. And you've got one challenger, the Old Bridge Board of Education president, Salvatore Giordano. That, on paper, could have been an interesting primary. It's Middlesex versus Monmouth and Ocean. It's a guy who has a fairly prominent elected position. Old Bridge is either the biggest or the second biggest town in the district. It's pretty big. But I have not seen that go anywhere. Giordano filed, instead of filing his fundraising, he filed whatever that form is that says, I'm not going to raise more than $6,000. I just have not seen any kind of press about this. I'm not exactly sure what his sort of plan was. Maybe this is going to plan. Maybe the only point was just sort of to get his name out there a little bit for future things. But this is not a campaign that is looking all that victorious. Okay, time has passed. In the 14th district, I won't do that again. In the 14th district, this is a Democratic-held district where you've got a Republican primary, which is sort of interesting. You've got the party line people, Adam Elias and Sky Gilmartin. They've got one challenger, Bina Shah, who ran in 2019, 2021, wants to run again this year. County party didn't endorse her. She did pretty terribly at the county convention, and she's just running anyways. So kudos to her. Seems unlikely that she'll win. She doesn't have the kind of operation that would speak to anything. And then it all might be a little bit moot anyways, because this is probably a district where, unless Republicans have a really good night, this is at the very fringes of the playing field. It's hard to really imagine them flipping it unless there's a lot that happens between now and November. We got a couple of kind of interesting primaries in Middlesex County. You've got 2 senators, Pat Dagden and Joe Vitale.
I hope my time isn't up. This is the 14th is one of those districts that the Republicans had to play in. They had to make a play for if they were going to make a play for one or both, control of one or both chambers and of the legislature. And the fact that, it doesn't really look like they got the top tier recruitment that they were looking for sort of tells you where that statewide effort lies at this point.
Yeah. And they've got candidates who could take advantage of a good situation, but not necessarily candidates who can force a Biden plus 18, Murphy plus 9 or something district just sort of into competitiveness all on their own.
Correct.
So then in 2 safe Democratic districts over in Middlesex, Pat Dagden faces a challenge from Christopher Benetti, whose main focus seems to be Italian-American representation. And then ironically, right next to him, Joe Vitale is facing a challenge from Michelle Burwell. These are 2 challengers who, a few of these pop up every year. They're good for democracy, people who want to run for office and do. And the ultimate result will almost certainly be that they lose by quite a bit. So, we'll we'll see there. If there's something unexpected there, then that could mean something, but I can't imagine that there will be. And then finally, this is just a great primary because it's so silly. In a safe Republican district, the 23rd district, you have a Democratic primary between, I've actually forgotten the name of the county or the party-backed candidate. Denise King is the party line candidate. She will win against Roger Bacon, a Trump Democrat who is running on the Drain the Swamp in Trenton Now line. He runs a lot. We always have a good laugh, and then we move on because he gets about 8% of the vote. So I think that'll happen again this year, unless either of you disagree.
No, I don't disagree at all.
And that brings us to...
Do you want to talk about, I don't want to leave Joe Cryan out too.
Oh,
Right.
I totally forgot about that one. Thank you. Yes. That's actually a primary that's worth discussing in a little bit of detail. And we'll maybe talk about it more when we get to local primaries. But the 20th District Democrats, Joe Cryan, Annette Quijano, and Reginald Atkins, all face challengers. The Union County Commissioner candidates also face challengers, and all of them are associated with Jamel Hawley, who is a former assemblyman running for mayor of Roselle. I remember when I first saw these filings, I was like, oh, that seems like a Hawley thing to build out a line. And it seems like it is. I don't think that these candidates see themselves as having a realistic shot at victory. But what they do is, if you look at the ballot in Roselle, it's two full slates running against each other. Jamel Hawley is not really at a disadvantage in that sense. And he's running a really serious campaign for mayor. And he's got a council slate too. An incumbent councilwoman is running with him. It's all very big. So
I love their slogan. I am you, Union County Democrats.
So, and I do want to come back, before we end this with a discussion about the Roselle race, because that's one of the best local races in the state.
Mm-hmm.
It is. And you get the glimmers of how strong of a campaign Hawley is running from the fact that he has these 6 running mates. He recruited all these people. Almost all of them are from Roselle.
Hey, that's a really good
win Roselle. That would not be, I don't know if it's necessarily likely, but it would not be hugely surprising to me if they win Roselle. It's just this district has a bunch more other than Roselle. So
that's really, you're making a really good case here for what we look for when you say, does a challenger who is running against the organization, do they have a shot? And the answer is, when you see it's kind of like, what the Supreme Court justice said, we know it when we see it, right? When you see the kind of thing coming together for Hawley that he's been able to put together, that there's a real challenge there. And in the absence of those kinds of signs, you're like, well, where are they?
Yeah, he knows how this game works. He's playing it pretty well.
He does. And look, one of the things, is Mike and I had talked about this a lot last week. If you've seen one race, you've seen one race. And so what'll happen is someday somebody's going to go through all of these old primaries and they're going to say, well, look at the percentage of the organization lines. And, in state Senate races, where the off the line candidate lost. And what will be forgotten is that Angela Alvey Wimbush was never in it to win a state Senate seat. Right. She's in this race exclusively to help Jamel Hawley win the mayor's race. So that'll get lost. Someday that'll be part of all the statistics. And these races, they're not running because they think they're going to be in the legislature. They're running in order to help somebody else.
Right.
There's so much that gets, I'm thinking about the number of details that we have right now about the primaries we're talking about, and how many of those details are going to be completely missing in accounts of these races in 10 years. Like the fact that the Camden GOP was originally backing DeSilvio and then switched to Del Borello. That to me is an extremely important moment in that race. But if you're just looking at the data, if someone like me, who, right now is like 12 and is the me of 10 years, is looking at these races, they're probably not going to catch on to that. They're going to look at the data and just be like, okay, well, the Camden GOP backed Del Borello, and that's why this happened. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
You look at, Roger Bacon running against Denise King in the Democratic Senate primary in District 23, where the, whoever wins that primary is going to get swamped by Doug Steinhardt in the general. But Roger Bacon, you don't see this often. You don't see a pro-Trump Democrat, and Roger Bacon was, I remember one of the things he said when he was running for, attempted to run for governor in 2021 is that, we needed more, Democrats should have had more people like Scott Garrett, and they'd do better. So if Roger Bacon was on the line, the off the line candidate would win. If he was unopposed, they'd run a write-in and beat him there. So history is going to show him in the statistics of a guy who lost off the line because the line, trumps all. No pun intended here. But Roger Bacon is not a Democrat. I mean, he's just. And I don't. You guys know I don't use those labels very easily. But Roger Bacon is not a fit for the Democratic Party in this district. Yet history is going to show that he's an off the line candidate.
Yeah, and I mean, even his slogan, if you know nothing else about him, "Drain the swamp," is his slogan. Drain the swamp in Trenton now. So any Democratic voter who goes into the voting booth is going to say, "Oh, I have a choice between a drain the swamp guy or Denise King. I'm voting for the Democrat."
Yeah.
All right, and now I think we can move on to LD24. So this might be my favorite race in the state. I just think it's a really interesting one for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons that I think it's interesting is that unlike these other races where the Senate campaign is the top billed campaign, there is no contested Senate campaign here. You've got Assemblyman Parker Space running uncontested. Originally, Steve Lonegan was running against him, but Lonegan kind of abruptly dropped out. And now Space is on a free path to the Senate. Very conservative assemblyman, although, also within the relatively standard establishment bounds of what New Jersey Republicans are accustomed to, just on the conservative edge of that, I think, is maybe the best way to describe him. He's got two running mates. You've got them up there in the top right. Don Fantasia is a Sussex County Commissioner, and Mike Ganamort, who is the Chester Township Mayor, Chester being in Morris. And they have they've technically drawn three opponents. Their two main opponents are below there: Jason Sarnosky, who's a Warren County Commissioner, and Josh Akins, who is the school board president in Lafayette Township, and beyond just Lafayette, has very much attracted a following for being a sort of conservative school board and education policy warrior. You've also got a fifth candidate, Rob Kovic, I'm not sure. Who
doesn't matter.
He is not really making much of an impression. He didn't team up with anyone else. He hasn't raised much money. It doesn't seem like he's really going anywhere, except maybe be a spoiler in a really close race. So what it really is here is you've got this fascinating four-way race. Fantasia and Ganamort have the line in Morris County, but the Morris line has shown itself to be sort of weak in some previous elections. Sarnosky and Akins have the line in Warren County, but Space declined the line entirely and is running with Fantasia and Ganamort. So Warren Republicans actually don't have a Senate candidate technically in this district. And that kind of messes with the ballot design. It makes it sort of, as we've talked about before, it makes the existence of the line less clear. And Sussex County doesn't have a line at all. You've got major Sussex County politicians like Steve Oraho, who's the Senate Minority Leader. He's retiring from the seat this year. He's backing Space, Fantasia, and Ganamort. But on the actual ballots itself and in the county party organization, there's nothing. It's a free-for-all. This is just how Sussex politicians are accustomed to it. I actually talked to Don Fantasia at the Morris County Convention, and she was saying, like, the way that I've won elections in Sussex County is totally different from this. That was her first county convention. It was just a totally different style of politics in that county than anywhere else in the state. So I think that produces the most dynamic and interesting primary, because we genuinely don't know how voters are going to react. In a huge portion of this district, they are voting in an open race where they will vote purely on their knowledge of the candidates and their opinions on the issues. So I think it's super interesting. I don't know where you guys feel like this race stands.
Go ahead, David. You can start.
Well, I don't know how to call this one, and this is one of the ones where it could be, one from one side and one from the other. What was shaping up to be a really good Senate primary, you said, was Steve Lonegan. I mean, look, one of the realities here, and sometimes we have to talk in realities, is there was there was really no credible way to paint Parker Space as a rhino. I mean, it is, this is a conservative Republican, and to try and scoot in there and somehow paint him as anything other than that, it wasn't, it just wasn't going to work. And Lonergan, who can be a good candidate in a primary, but he saw it. I mean, he just saw the fundraising wasn't kicking off, and the endorsements weren't coming in. Space, is a strong candidate. The question is, are there going to be coattails here? There's not always coattails in this district, and what you've got are, these are not newcomers. These are, they may be new faces for statewide politics, but they've all had wins. Dawn Fantasia, won a contested race for when it was freeholder, Sussex County freeholder, now commissioner. Sarnoski's been a county commissioner in Warren, and he's got his own local base there. It's a small number, but it's very possible that out of those two towns in Warren County, Sarnoski could get a huge percentage of the vote. So we don't know. Josh Akins, it's not just school board, but he was the executive director of the Sussex County Republicans, and they are split. And he is and I don't take sides. I think you've got four strong candidates here. Akins has won school board races, but he's got his stuff together. He knows he's figured out how to do this. And Mike Ganamort, now we say he's from Morris County. He's the mayor of Chester, and Morris is about half of what Sussex is. But I would dispute the premise that Ganamort's not a Sussex County candidate. 20 years ago, the site that I used to run, Politics NJ, we reported on 18-year-old Mike Ganamort winning a county committee seat in his hometown of Sparta. He worked for Scott Garrett for 10 years. He's got some real roots in Sussex County. So I don't know what's going to happen. They're running aggressively. There's a lot of inside the bubble talk. They're talking about this consultant named Bill Winkler, who is by all accounts a very toxic guy. I think he's I'll tone it down. I mean, a lot of people in Republican politics that have worked with him, they think he is one sick son of a bitch. They really do. And
well, to wit, the attack on Dawn Fantasia for her ex-husband's criminal record, and really just beyond the pale stuff about her family and her divorce, and just stuff stuff that nobody else would touch. You really run the risk of a backlash, and I think she will ultimately be the beneficiary of that, because it's none of it at any point has been a reflection on her, and I think people will see that.
And she's won several county-wide races in Sussex County, and you see Joey's number here. It's about 2/3 of the vote. There's no line, but she's got a good name ID there, and she's running right next to Parker Space. I can see a close race. I can see any different number of combinations here. Whether it's the Sarnoski base in a small area, where if he's able to turn out those votes, it might overshadow a low. So we were talking about the very beginning of this. Two small towns, Alamucci and Independence, that are it's just 5% of the vote. But if he cranks out turnout in those towns, and some Morris or Sussex towns aren't turning out, then they take on an exponentially greater role. Akins has built a grassroots organization in that county. I mean, it's he he's shown himself to be personable and knowledgeable about issues. So I don't know. I wouldn't call this race. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a big margin one way or the other. I wouldn't be surprised if we're sitting around on election night, not sure that it can be called.
Yeah. One of the things that's interesting.
But I also have to point out, we say this because this is an assembly primary in the 24th district. I wish my friend, Patrick Murray and Dan Casino, and Ashley Koenig had done polling, independent polling in this primary, but they didn't, and they shouldn't, because it's not a big enough audience for them. So we don't know. We don't know, in the vote by mail that's already been returned. We don't know if those are Fantasia and Ganamort voters or Sarnoski Aikens voters, or we don't know who they are, who they are, and there's no way. There's just no way to know on a race like this. It could be a blowout, it could be a squeaker, and we just don't know.
One of the things that Ryan Dubicki and I have noticed about the vote by mail is that you can go to Cape May and you can go to Sussex, two of the most rural counties in the state, and you can see a little bit of an increase in a little bit of a bump in vote by mail turnout in those counties, just because they're so rural. And because it's a more convenient option for somebody than getting to the polls. So I would say that at least in Sussex, these are people who usually vote by mail, and they may be the exception to the rule. So they're sort of, every cycle kind of Republicans. For whatever that's worth. One of the things that's been really interesting to me, and I think to outsiders trying to watch this race in, Trenton, for example, to see Parker Space being the anchor is really strange, but he is the anchor, and they are running with him as the anchor. They're wrapping themselves around him in his part of the district where that makes sense to do that. And, the Space team, they're not calling themselves that, but that's what all their advertising looks like. And then in Morris, they are using Senator Bucco's endorsement and the sheriff's endorsement to try and make themselves into the establishment candidates there.
I think so I agree with David that this is a really tough race to call. I think that the one thing that I'm willing to say is that the most likely candidate to win of the four is Dawn Fantasia. She has the countywide base. She just sort of has an advantage in every county. She has the countywide base in Sussex. And I think David maybe undersold her a little bit when he was talking about her first commission or freeholder win. She and her running mate got like more than 60% of the vote against two incumbent commissioners. So she definitely has, or at least in 2018 had, some serious chops in Sussex. She has the line in Morris, and she's running with the one Morris politician. And in Warren, small portion of the district could be pivotal, but she's still running with Space there. And she was actually originally offered the line in Warren. She turned it down like Space did because she wanted to keep the slate together. But so she clearly is not an unfriendly face there either. So I think that if you're just sort of breaking it down like that, she has the most advantages of any of the candidates, and thus is probably the most likely to win. But as you repeatedly emphasized, David, this is a very unpredictable race, and you could tell me any particular combination of results. You could tell me an Ganamort Sarnoski blowout and be like, I guess. It really is that sort of that tough to call.
Well, and look, we're also talking about Sussex County, where voters are accustomed to participating in contested primary elections, because the general elections for local office have not been competitive. Democrats haven't won a county race in Sussex since 1999. So you're talking about people that know that if they want their vote to matter, it means they have to come out in a primary, and you've got a competitive freeholder race there. Again, no clue what's going to happen. You've got an incumbent who's been around for a while, Herb Yardley. Then you've got a young. I think he's younger than Joey, and I don't even know if that's legal to run for office.
Easy statement in New Jersey politics.
But by the name of DeGroot, And we'll see on election night if you're looking at Sussex and Morris and it's DeGroote's win. We're gonna have to play with that punctuation. Joey's gonna have to teach me how to do that one, but
it's the D's Groot.
Yeah, and so then you have Nick D'Agostino, who has really wrapped himself around the social conservative agenda in a countywide race. So you've got it's competitive there, and also remember, because there's no lines, nobody's got the advantage. I don't mean just in the assembly level, but nobody's got the advantage of running, with Parker Space in Sussex County for a county commissioner race. So you've got a lot of things driving turnout, and you've got if people do go, and they should look at Joey's document he put together on local primaries. You have contested primaries in Andover, Hampton, Hopatcong, Stanhope, Stillwater, and Wantage. So you've got a greater potential there for turnout, because you've got primaries. I don't know how competitive some of these primaries are there. I haven't really followed them that closely, so I don't want to say, but there are primaries, there are races there, and you want to look at how that's going to go. In Morris, on the Morris County side, you don't have contested local races in Mount Olive or Washington Township. Joey, you can tell better than I can, but I don't know that there are really any on the Morris side, driving these local turnouts. So I think that's going to matter also.
They both sides have resources. Both sides have money. Gannon-Wart has the most cash on hand. As a mayor, you'd imagine that he has the ability to do that. But Sarnoski's got 40 on hand. Aiken's got 5. Gannon-Wart's got 75, and Fantasia's got 9. So they've had resources in this race. It's not as if one side has not had the ability to drive their message.
Yeah. Shall we move on to the other big Morris County related primary?
Yeah.
So I guess when I said before that the 4th district primary was the nastiest in the state, I still think that's true. But this is another race where you've got two politicians who do not like each other. So this is a Morris County district that I had actually, when the new map came out, I didn't really pay attention to how much it was redrawn, because it was still a pretty safe Republican Morris County based district. And that's kind of as far as my mind went. But it's actually a very different district than what it was before. There's only 4 towns that you've got shared between this district and the previous district, worth about, I forget the exact number, but 40-ish% of Republican voters. And so that has created an opening for primary challengers. You've got 3 incumbents. You got Joe Panaccio in the Senate. You got Jay Weber in the Assembly. And you got Brian Bergen, who right now represents the neighboring 25th district, moved over into the 26th. So he's especially, he knows this district barely at all. And they've got a trio of, established politicians against them. They've got Morris County Commissioner Tom Mastrangelo, who won off the line just last year, re-election in Morris County. Now he's running off the line again. He ran off the line in 2021. This is a theme for him. You've got former Assemblywoman Betty Lou DeCroce, who is aiming for a comeback. She lost the line and narrowly lost the primary in 2021. And you've got Parsippany Councilman Robert Peluso, who honestly has faded into the background kind of. It seems like he is more of a slate completer than a true candidate in his own right. He's raised very little money. I don't think anybody really expects Jay Weber to lose. So that's sort of an interesting component to this primary, where you've got one race that doesn't really exist, the Weber versus Peluso race. But Mastrangelo versus Panaccio and Bergen versus DeCroce, very live races, lots of money, lots of self-funding on the Mastrangelo side. Everyone seems to think it's close. So how... I guess I answered this question a little bit in my spiel, but why is this such a close race? You've got 3 incumbents who are all very conservative. It's a bit hard to find things to really lambast them from the right on. Why is this still such a competitive primary?
you say it's we were talking about this with Parker Space. It's hard. I mean, the idea that somebody is saying that Joe Panaccio's a rhino, that's not
a hard
really
case to make.
That's tough. I mean,
he was Trump's co-chair in the state.
Yeah, and for Trump in 16, and in 20, and has been one of the most conservative, senators in the state since he got to the state Senate in 2007. It's hard, and you've got a lot of what you've got in this campaign are a lot of, well, let's take this one bit of information and how can we twist it to try and make Joe Panaccio look like he's a liberal that really shouldn't be running in this party, and it's, a lot of it's not fair. A lot of it's just not fair. A lot of what is being said about Panaccio. Joe Panaccio is a conservative Republican, and what happened is, he's in leadership and they've taken some votes and again, just like everything else in politics, there's this big asterisk next to everything. And the reality is they're taking aspects of bills that Panaccio voted for, and they're picking out little things without looking at the whole picture of what Panaccio accomplished. Mastrangelo is, he's a street fighter, but Panaccio's a kid from Brooklyn, not afraid to mix it up either. These two guys, this race has been in the works for years, where Mastrangelo threatened, the 21 primary. There was even talk in 17 that he might go in this direction. They can't stand each other. This is the reason I think Republican senators should watch this is just when you think you're in good shape, just when you think that you have assembled a voting record that is that is consistent with your constituency, somebody may just come in and try and paint you in a way that just, it might not be terribly fair. Politics isn't fair. Panaccio will admit that, but I think things that are being said about him don't accurately reflect who he is, and if he loses, it's because voters, after years of easy races, uncontested primaries, non-competitive general elections, I don't want to use the word complacent because that's not accurate here, but you're not constantly out there spending money in a campaign in order to get your name known. And if this is a close race, as some people says it is, I think it's because Tom Mastrangelo has been on the ballot in contested primaries so many times. And what is it? It was 19, 21, 22, now 23. Yeah. He's been in front of the voters, talking to the voters in all these towns because he was a county commissioner, running county-wide. And this is a lot of news. Joey said a lot of new territory for Panaccio. Joe, do you number offhand how much of this district is new for Panaccio?
It's in the realm of 60%. And the other thing that I know, sorry, I'm trying to find it. The other thing that I know off the top of my head is that, well, I guess I know off the top of my head because I'm looking at the map right now. Mastrangelo represents by far more of the district than anyone else running. He currently represents 83% of it. Yeah. So he is, in that sort of weird sense, more of the incumbent than any of the actual incumbents. Now, whether voters will actually act like that, I mean, voters who are voting in Republican primaries or any primaries really are engaged enough voters that they'll probably understand that distinction. But still, it is very much, I'm not sure when the last time Joe Panaccio was, if ever, Joe Panaccio was on the ballot in, say, Denville. I know exactly when the last time Thomas Strangelo was last on the ballot in Denville. And so we'll see how voters kind of react to that. You've also got...
Yeah. 2008, by the way, when he ran for the U.S. Senate.
Okay.
So in a similar vein, you have DeGroot running just last year against Mikey Sherrill, right? So that was a high-profile race, and you have Betty Lou DeCroce, a name that people have known in this part of the state. We talk about going back years, but there's going back years, and then there are fixtures, right? And that's sort of the DeCroce name in this part of the state, and so. Not only did they draw column one, did the challengers draw column one, Mastrangelo draw column one, but it's a column one that's filled with familiar names. Yeah. So it's really going to confuse and minimize the effect of the line here. It's probably the poster child for where we're going to see that happen.
Yeah, and I think that you saw. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, it's just in 2022 in the 5th congressional district Republican primary, you saw Frank Pallotta score an upset. And I believe that part of the reason he was able to score an upset against Nick DeGregorio is that he had been the Republican nominee in 2020. And so he had already been the Republican standard bearer. He was the one who fought the good fight against Josh Gottheimer. And Republican primary voters appreciate that, even if he lost by whatever percentage points he lost by. That's still, he was their warrior in that race. And Paul DeGroot was their warrior in the race against Mikey Sherrill. Doesn't particularly matter that he lost by 19 percentage points. The point is that he was very recently the unified Republican choice for Congress, even though he won a very close contested primary that had a lot of different allegiances. He was the guy in November, and voters appreciate that. I think there's a lot of evidence that when people run, and he ran a pretty good campaign, for even though the result wasn't good for him. Like it was a decently well-run campaign. I think that is the kind of thing that voters really appreciate. And then you look at Typhoon Selin, who's his opponent both this year and last year. He ran for Congress. Now he's running for re-election as county commissioner. Even though he's the incumbent, he doesn't necessarily have that same built-in, oh, you are our guy. And so we'll see whether that is enough to get DeGroot across the finish line. I think it very well could be.
That especially means a lot to Republicans. Republicans always reward, right? I mean, presidential nominees traditionally are the people who have run before.
Yeah, and especially in Morris County, that had been the case over time. But I would not be at all surprised to see Paul DeGroot win this primary. I don't want to call it or predict it, but I almost think he's the front runner in this race, and I don't know how that affects that ticket too. If because at some point, you're either start in column one and stay in column one, or you're going to start in column two and go to one and go to two. And Morris County voters do that. They will pick and choose, but that was in the old days when it was open primaries. Remember, this is not a mature line. This is only the third election that they've had an organization line. And so we don't have a lot of history about the line holding. We know that Selin beat DeGroot in Morris County, but not by very much at all. And we know that Betty Lou DeCroce, that was just a stunning defeat in the 21 convention to Christian Barranco by, I think it was 9 votes. And then Betty Lou DeCroce ran off the line in Morris, and that was a close primary. She didn't lose by all that much. Had the swing of 5 votes, 5 county committee votes at a Morris County convention, and she'd still be in the legislature. So I don't know where this is going to go. You look at the assembly race. Joey, I don't know. Are we ready to move on to the assembly?
In LD 26? Yeah, I feel like we kind of talked. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so we talked about Weber, right? I agree. Weber's, Jay Weber's going to win. He's going to win by a significant number. This is a race between Brian Bergen and Betty Lou DeCroce, and Bergen is a worker. He's out ringing doorbells every night. He's been doing it for months. He he has sort of created a new brand of republicanism in the legislature, where it sort of reminds me of Newt Gingrich in the late '80s and early '90s, where he stood up and made these speeches and said, we can't just be happy being in the minority. We got to fight, and we got to call Democrats out on things. Bergen sort of reminds me of that. But this DeCrose name, I remember Alex DeCrose. Alex DeCrose and Dean Gallo were business partners, and he was a freeholder and a county chairman. And there had been a DeCrose representing Parsippany and some of those surrounding towns in the legislature since 1989. Until the 21 convention that was within 9 votes. So that's a brand, that's a name there. What Betty Lou DeCrose doesn't have this time is the support of the International Union of Operating Engineers Local 825 that stuck with her in 2021 because she voted for the gas tax, and they said we'll have the backs of anybody who does, and they were with her, and they put a ton of money. I think there was over $1 million spent in total in that primary 2 years ago, and Christian Branco still won. So it takes a lot. Those resources aren't there. She doesn't have 825 this time around. So to me, I think it's strictly name ID. And then the other thing that you have to point out is Parsippany is the two other things. One was Parsippany is the biggest town in that district by far. And Jamie Barbario, the mayor, is supporting Tom Mastrangelo and Jay Weber and Betty Lou DeCrose. So this is this is sort of a test of the Barbario organization since he returned as mayor 2 years ago, whether he can still push, his endorsement has influence. The other thing is where the incumbents do have the line in Passaic County, it's 17% of the vote. And that's how Paul DeGroot won that nomination for Congress last year. Is I think he got, 5 candidates, and I think he got like 80% of the vote in Passaic County because he had the line there. So that could be the saving grace of the legislative race is a good vote out of Passaic, except that Pompton Lakes has, the Republicans dumped their mayor off the line, and he's running off the line. So it's, it may not carry as much as it used to.
I think that Passaic is the biggest reason why I'm a little bit bearish on DeCrose's chances, because she lost in 2021 despite having the line in both Passaic and Essex, which was then in the district.
In different towns in Passaic.
Yes, it was just West Milford then, and it was a few Essex towns. I forget exactly what percentage of the district it was, but it was a relatively similar, something in the realm of like 20% of the district, or the district's Republicans. And despite having the line there, she still lost Morris by enough that she lost overall. This time, that advantage is reversed, where instead of specifically having the support there, she really does not. And she can probably, Bergen in particular, and then his running mates, can probably count on a pretty big margin in most of Passaic County, maybe with the exception of Pompton Lakes. We'll see. So that just right off the bat, that makes the math more complicated for DeCrose, because we have a really clear example of a close primary that she still lost. And now her biggest advantage from that primary is reversed this time.
She also, the bulk of her money in her race has been loaned to her from herself to her campaign. So an indication that she hasn't been able to generate a lot of support from outside her own funds.
Right.
Yeah. And, and the other thing, and I guess, maybe I asked Joey, to take this question because you wrote a great story about it recently, which is Bill Spadea likely to be running for governor in 2025, and he's taking sides in some of these races. So maybe you could talk a
Taking
little
sides
about
in all of these races.
Yeah.
Right.
Bill Spadea is for Mastrangelo. Bill Spadea is for Sarnoski and Aikens. Bill Spadea is for DeSilvio, and Bill Spadea is for Durr. It's basically in each race, if you could identify a candidate who is running as the more conservative candidate, I'm not necessarily identifying them as the more conservative candidate, but that's their pitch. Bill Spadea is backing them. And so, it's a risky strategy. If 3 or all 4 of those slates win, then that suddenly gives Spadea a huge foot in the door in the legislature, where he's got prominent politicians in these different parts of the state who are now like in his corner. He stumped for them when few others would, and that's a big get for him. But if all or most of them lose, then he has pissed off a bunch of county organizations and not really gotten much to show for it. And it's definitely contrasts with what Jack Ciattarelli is doing, which Ciattarelli, he's some of his former and current allies and staffers are getting involved, and he's photographed himself with some of the candidates and stuff. But at least in an official sense, he is saying, I'm not backing any of these people. Primaries are healthy, but I'm it's not for me to say who you should vote for in these races. And that, it has the opposite risks and rewards of Spadea's strategy. It doesn't really alienate anyone, but it also doesn't really ingratiate himself to anybody. So like Ed Durr, probably going to win re-nomination. He now is looking at the 2 most likely candidates for governor in 2025, one of whom was down in Salem County all the time saying vote for Ed Durr, the other of whom was sort of hands off. So we'll see how that plays out. I mean, the only way to tell who really won is based on the actual results themselves. We'll see which strategy feels like it was more wise.
Yeah, we'll probably be rating him either as a big winner or a big loser on Tuesday night.
Yeah.
Or a little of each, right? I mean,
yeah, it could be. Right.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, Spadea, if he does pull off some wins, whether it's whether it's 3 or 20, 24, he's getting for a guy who is not supposed to be the establishment candidate, he's between that and Ocean County, he's gaining some footholds into the establishment. And we can and will and should do this in at length about 2025, but I in the future. But I thought it was important to bring that up for these races.
The other thing is that the PBA and the NRA are both out in the district on behalf of Panaccio. There's been a little bit of controversy about Mastrangelo with his mailer trying to make it look like he's got the NRA support. But those 2 groups, the extent that they have rank and file Republicans in the district, certainly both do, and that they are cranked up and they respond to those groups, then that may help Panaccio and his slate.
And look, I say this a lot, and I hope I don't sound like a broken record, but boy, a lot of these primaries are you're going to be won and lost based upon noticeable lack of local media coverage and lower circulations, and you look at these Morris County races. I mean, the Daily Record, which was a big deal, is more of a newsletter, really. I mean, and they've got Bill Westhoven, who's their only reporter left covering politics. He's a great reporter. He's a nice guy. He's he works hard. He's at all these things, but and it's not his fault. But Gannett, Gannett sucks. They just suck. It's why they're they are not even trying to cover these races, and as a result, when you talk about what used to be, in the old days, you don't have editorials that are taken seriously, that are calling people out on these things, right. and you don't have an ability, you don't have a forum for somebody to come in and say, hey, this guy's lying, this isn't true, this isn't right, and sort of influence public opinion there. Here, what you're talking about now in the era of Gannett suckiness and the Star Ledger being, on some days even worse than Gannett is is basically you're in the Wild West, and it's every man for himself and every woman for herself, and they are just trying to depend upon new ways to getting their message. And I'm getting text messages every day, from Tom Mastrangelo telling me how liberal Joe Panaccio is. And if you don't know Joe Panaccio and you don't have anybody who's there validating that, that's what ought to keep Joe Panaccio up at night, is that people might be lying about his record, and there's nobody really out there to come in and say this is wrong and this is how it is.
It's a really good point. It's the absence of local media that allows that stuff to thrive. It allows that stuff to take off in the absence of anything to the contrary.
Yeah, and by the way, you look west, and I will stop, I promise, but soon. But you go west, New Jersey Herald, one of the great daily newspapers in the state. I mean, they were a daily newspaper for Sussex County, a small county with its own daily, and they were fantastic on local news. And then Gannett bought it, and they killed it. They just gutted it. There is nobody covering local stuff out there anymore. And you're talking about a rural county. It's hard to go door to door in Sussex County. And there's just nobody covering local news out that way. So.
And you and I have talked about that, David, how there are so many ways that it affects our politics, because do people even realize that there's an election on Tuesday without the steady drumbeat of reading your newspaper and reading the coverage and reading? How do we even know, other than getting the sample ballot in the mail, that there's an election coming up and when it is?
And I say this, all the time. Anybody who is watching this live stream, an hour and 36 minutes into it, we are all living inside the bubble, all of us, and we are following this. And when the sample ballots come, they are taken and they are opened and they are inspected, and people look at it carefully. And every time a piece of mail comes in, they're read several times, and people will go out in search of these commercials. But that is not the way the electorate is. And one of the things that I preach, for better or for worse, is that people have got to understand that we are all in the same bubble, and real people don't live in our world, and they don't know these things, and that's one of the reasons why these campaigns are so important, is they're trying to reach those people, not those that are watching this live stream. And thank you for watching, everybody. It's not like I don't appreciate it, but we are, we
get out and find 10 real voters to watch with you.
Yeah, we are political junkies, and that's why we're talking about it in this kind of detail.
It's very likely why we fall so much into voting Democrat or voting Republican right now, that resemble the parliamentary system, right? Because this is what you fall back on when you don't know anything else. It's when you get into these primary races where you have to choose between Republicans or between Democrats that we are flummoxed and we don't have a lot of good information. I've been asked by people at Ryder, can you help me figure out how to vote, or what are the positions of the candidates running in my town? And we've got to go scouring their social media. We've got to go scouring anywhere we can get, how do you find information about these people? And I'm as high information as I can get, and I can't find them information about Trenton City Council candidates in their town and what their positions are, So it's a tough thing to do for the regular average voter.
So I'm going to steer us back on course for our final 3 legislative primaries. I did not make maps of these because the geography of these 3 primaries is not as relevant, but I think that they all have some interesting dynamics. And I think the biggest one, and weirdly one of the primary, well, not weirdly, but it's one of the primaries that has gotten the most press coverage, even though by all indications it's not actually that competitive, is in the 27th district, which is Essex County and then Clifton and Passaic County. It is the one incumbent on incumbent race, unless you count Sawyer versus Durr, in the entire state. You've got former governor and current state senator, longtime state senator, Richard Cody, Dick Cody, who has the party line, and he was put in the same district as his colleague, Nia Gill. And you've got this sort of, at least in theory, this battle of giants. Cody is running with Assemblyman John McKeon and then Alexon Cayasos Gill, who, because Tom Giblin is retiring. Nia Gill, not Alexon Cayasos Gill, that's very confusing, is running with Eve Robinson. And you've got former Assemblyman Craig Stanley also in the race, unaffiliated with any slate. I say all these names just to sort of point out, this has all the makings of a competitive primary. You've got two incumbents running against each other. You've got an assemblyman aiming for a comeback. You've got an open seat. But no one is really treating this like it's actually that competitive. Why is that?
Because it's not. It's not. Dick Cody is going to crush Senator Gill. Cody is been in the legislature. I was 12 years old watching Dick Cody's first campaign for the state assembly. He was 26. He has been in the assembly since the Ford administration. Bill Cahill was in his final week as governor when Cody got there, and he's got the line. You could argue that there may have been a scenario by which fresh face, new district, but Cody is just history, former governor, and he doesn't let up. So I'll say it, and I'm gonna get I'll get a call from him at one point saying, hey Dave, how come you called me paranoid on the internet? And I'll have to say, well, Senator, and he'll say, no, Governor, call me Governor, and I'll say, all right, Governor, I called you paranoid because you're a little paranoid, and that has allowed him to survive. And Cody has said to me over the years that you're not paranoid if they really are out to get you. And he's had people out to get him. He's won a couple races where the party has dropped him from the line, and he's won off the line, and he has figured this out. And look, Senator Gill, I'm doing this a long time, and I've never spoken to her. She is not a friendly, approachable person. She has coasted through really good districts. When you're representing East Orange and Montclair, it's not that hard. And she has not put up in my opinion, the fight that she could have. She's
demonstrated that she can. She ran off the line. I forget exactly what year it was. 2001.
She did against Leroy Jones of all people.
Yeah, against Leroy Jones, she beat him off the line. She has within her the capability to be a really powerful politician.
She does.
But in the 20 years since, what David said about her being unapproachable, she just generally has that reputation in Trenton of not particularly being interested in speaking with press, not particularly being interested in deepening those relationships. And it's sort of finally coming back to get her. And I think that there is an alternate scenario where, even dealt this shitty hand, she still comes back and runs this really strong campaign that at minimum gives Cody a real fight. But that's not what she's doing.
You can't beat something. You can't beat something with nothing. And John Wisniewski had this test years ago. I remember we were working on Joe Doria's mayoral race in Bayonne, and he drove into Bayonne and he started counting the signs on lawns, not the signs that are just in rights of way, but on lawns. And he said, Joe Doria's got about 5-1 over his opponent. And so to me, that's indicative that he's going to win the race. So, we are, like you said, David, we are in our bubble, but we do see certain things. And when you look at social media, when you look at her press releases, when you look at any sign of life, any sign of organizational support, any of the elements that you would need to show that you have got an organization that's going to come out on election day and support you. What we're seeing from Jamel Holly, for example, what we just talked about, you're not seeing any of those signs of life. You're not seeing likes. You're not going to see shares. You're not seeing any of that stuff that indicates that there's a live campaign going on.
No, and and I look at one of the data points that I look at in this race, objectively is Senator Gill and this is opposed to Assembly candidate Collazos Gill and County Commissioner Collazos Gill. There's a lot of Gills on this ballot, but Senator Gill has represented Clifton in the legislature for 22 years. Dick Cody has never been on the ballot in Passaic County. Clifton is the largest town in the district, and John Curry didn't flinch to give Cody the line, and he did so because Cody, maybe because he's a little paranoid or a lot paranoid, but he knew how to read a map, and he's been going to events in Clifton, where I hear from people on the ground there over the years, where they've never seen Senator Gill, but they've seen Senator Cody. So if you think about a place where she ought to have taken been able to make a stand, it's if she had worked Clifton for 22 years and she had relationships with municipal, governing body members, which she does not. And if she had relationships with county committee members in Clifton, which she does not, or school board members or activists, of which, people there don't know who she is, even though she's been their senator for 22 years. If she had worked it, she would, maybe be a little bit of a contender here, but she didn't work it. And that's I apologize if people think I sound tough, but I think that is the way it is. I think she ignored a lot of people for a lot of long time, and nobody feels like, my God, we've got to really go out and work hard. Let's go out and canvass for Senator Gill because she's always been there for us when we need her. That's not the case. And the other thing is she has not, in my opinion, branded herself effectively. She could be campaigning on how she is, sort of a John McCain like figure, a sort of, a maverick of the Senate.
It would be true. That would be true.
She's held up she's given Democrats a hard time for years. She didn't support Scutari for Senate president. She wouldn't vote to confirm Stuart Radner for Chief Justice. She used senatorial courtesy to hold up that nomination for a little while. So she could have, in places like, in places that are new to her, where you have what used to be strong Republican that are now, the new Democratic base, Milburn and Livingston, and her hometown of Montclair, she could have found some of these natural allies. She hasn't courted endorsements of women elected officials. She hasn't made it a race about anything. I'm not saying, you're talking about a woman senator from Essex County. You're talking about, and it used to be she was the only one, and then Teresa Ruiz came, and now you've got Renee Burgess, and you're about to get Brittany Timberlake, and suddenly the Senate is a majority women from Essex County. Kristen Carrata representing West Essex. She hasn't played any of the cards that are available to her, and I think that is just the reality here. And again, I'm going to come back to it, as I was, in some of these other discussions, what we will see years from now, or even not that long, maybe when this lawsuit on the line is up in front of Judge Karashi, and they talk about, well, look at this, Nia Gill, she was she had no trouble winning until they tossed her from the line, and then she got killed in the primary. I'm talking about what the asterisks are. What are the footnotes to these races? And she did not put herself in a position of raising money, of stockpiling money over years and years and years of uncontested, non-competitive races, and she didn't work her. She didn't work whatever magic she could have had. She took advantage of nothing, and that's the story. And if by the way, nobody should call me to testify for either side in this Line lawsuit because each one of these data points comes with its own story, and that's the story here in the 27th.
So you mentioned money, $750,000 cash on hand versus $9,000 cash on hand. I mean, you can beat a line, but you cannot beat a line with $9,000.
Yeah, and Cody's not even spending. He's not burning through it. Dick Cody. He's looking ahead to. Like, I don't want to spend all of it. What if they come after me in a primary in 2027? He'll only be 80. That's not so old in New Jersey Senate years. And I'll tell you, I'll say this. Anybody who thinks that Dick Cody is ever going to retire, you're fooling yourself. John McKeon. I playfully refer to him as Prince Charles because he is just sitting there waiting. 22 years for Cody to leave. He thought he was going to run for governor, and there might have been an opportunity to move up to the Senate. But Dick Cody, he got to be governor and Senate president at the same time. He was the governor of New Jersey, for over a year and didn't have to give up his Senate seat. So Cody's holding on to this money. Nobody's going to touch him this time. And he'll be 50, serve 50 years in the legislature by now. And the record for the longest serving state senator in U.S. history is 54. And it's 58. 58, the guy in Wisconsin, right? And the record is 58. So Cody's going to come into 2027. He's going to be at 54. You think Cody doesn't want to set that record? You think he's going to leave 4 years short of the record? There's no way. So he's holding on to his money too.
Okay, I think that we should take a break from kicking Nia Gill while she's down.
Yeah.
And,
so by the way, talk about the assembly race quickly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, there is a primary, for that. It's, Eve Robinson, who people in Montclair, they like her. She's not getting the endorsements, but she was a school board member. She might do a little bit better in Montclair than an off-the-line candidate usually would be, but she, she's really there to help her friend Senator Gill. So I don't think that's going to. And then you've got Craig Stanley, and he's a former assemblyman, 14 years in the assembly, but he's never run in a single town in this district. It might as well be a brand new guy.
Member of the Payne family.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the fact that we just had a moment of silence after mentioning these two names is sort of indicative of, these are two interesting candidates in theory. They haven't taken off in practice. And you're probably going to see Prince Charles McKeon, which that's just a terrible metaphor at this point because it is King Charles McKeon, stay in the assembly.
Not for him.
Start her first term. I mean, that's just
my favorite.
That's what we're barreling towards here.
Let me ask you. Go ahead, Mike, and then I want to ask.
My favorite moment of filing day was you running into Craig Stanley, being surprised by running into Craig Stanley showing up with his petitions out of nowhere.
It took me a couple of minutes. He mentioned his name, and I had learned a bunch of people's names that day, and most of them were completely unknown to me. And that one also was basically unknown to me. I'd heard of him before, but I didn't make the connection. And so I was just like, "Oh, and why are you running? Like, what are your goals in the legislature?" And then he kind of stopped at one point. I was like, and I served in the assembly before. I was like, oh.
Well, let me ask you both a question. And this is hypothetical. This is fiction land. But let's say that John McKeon had said, you know what, I want to go to the Senate. Damn it, I'm just going to run. And McKeon got in this race and against two incumbents who are a decade or a decade and a half older than he is. Could McKeon have won this race, or did he make the right decision? Because remember, Joey.
Which question are you asking? Are you asking whether he could win the race, or are you asking whether he could win the line?
Yeah, I guess I'm asking both. Could he? I don't know if he could have won the line, but if he'd gotten into this race and fielded, there would have been then maybe 2 open assembly seats in this district, and he could have fielded somebody out of somebody else out of Montclair or Clifton or or Livingston or Milburn, something like that, and he never actually said, and Joey, I lost count of the number of times over the last 2 years that you've asked John McKeon, are you running for the Senate? He never actually took his name out. He never said.
I only asked him once, actually, but we certainly thought about it.
I think it was more than that. It seemed like more than that, but we'll see. I'll go check later, and I'll let you know privately if that you're wrong on this. But he never actually took himself out of the race. He never said, no, I wouldn't challenge Dick Cody. I'm going to stay where I am. My question is there a scenario by which McKeon could have seized this new district and just gone for it and won?
I mean, Gil is absolutely the maverick of the Senate, but Cody is also, he can be sort of a pain in the ass, take that as a good thing or a bad thing, whatever you will, in the side of leadership and in the side of the Essex Democrats. I mean, I just remember, he and Gil were sort of oddly aligned in holding out on Matt Platkin for a while. They each, for Attorney General, he's an Essex guy, so they had senatorial courtesy over him. And each of them, for their own reasons, withheld it for months and months. And that slowed down. I mean, he was just acting Attorney General. It didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But they both chose to slow it down. And when you have 2 different senators like that who like gumming up the works sometimes and realize that they have that power, I could see a scenario where McKeon leverages that and says, look, I'm a progressive Democrat and I'll fight for what I believe in, but also I'm going to be more reliable than these 2. And maybe that might not be a great pitch in primary, but it'd be certainly a great pitch in terms of getting the line.
Well, as you said, David, he, as we talked about when we talked about Senator Gill, he would have to go and make a serious play to John Curry for Clifton, and he'd have to make a serious play in Montclair. And if he can make that progressive argument in a place like Montclair, if he can go to Milburn and he can, make the bona fides there and Livingston, then I guess it really would have been a lot less comfortable for Cody. I think Cody occupies a singular space in New Jersey, right? I mean, he's really the only guy in the legislature who has the profile that he does. It's hard to imagine somebody beating him with the line, with the money, with the organization support. Hard to imagine that all of that breaks against him. But, I certainly think McCain could have made a strong play for it. I just don't know how much it ultimately would have made. Could you have eaten into Cody? Yes. Could you have taken him out? I'm not sure.
Okay.
You guys ready to move on to LD28? We're nearing the end, at least on the legislature. So I think LD28, which is the district right next door, it's a Newark-based district. It I think has the largest Black population of any district in the state, and it to me is the ultimate failure to launch primary in the state. You've got Cleopatra Tucker, who's an incumbent. So the Senate, Renee Burgess is uncontested. She won a special convention, also uncontested last year, and she's set. For the Assembly, you've got Cleopatra Tucker, who's an incumbent Assemblywoman from Newark. You've got Assemblywoman Mila J.C., who is redistricted from another district, retiring. And the county organization's pick to replace her is Garnet Hall, who is the deputy Essex County clerk, I believe, but more importantly is a Maplewood politician. And then you have former Maplewood Mayor Frank McGehee, who, unlike Garnet Hall, has actually been elected to office before. He has this history of relationships in Maplewood. And when he got into the race, David and I had a number of conversations about how this race looked like it could go somewhere. If you have McGehee really starting to pick up support in South Orange and Maplewood, which are pretty small towns, but have a pretty big vote footprint. then maybe you'd see something happening. But I don't think that's happened. But that's been what's happened. You have not seen this primary be at the front of many people's minds.
No.
Sorry, Mike, I thought you would jump in, which is why I stopped. But I guess
No. I agree with you that, just because somebody knew how to win in their town at some point in their life doesn't mean that they necessarily know how to win a legislative race, which is bigger than just their town at another point in their life, right? I think is the point, right? A lot of people jump into legislative races for lots of reasons. Doesn't mean that they have. We talked about this when we talked about Sam Thompson. Could Sam Thompson have known how to put together a race on his own, running against suddenly the party that he was, aligned with his whole life? Just because somebody's won before doesn't mean they know how to do all those things or put all that together for themselves. And I guess, I don't know what this mayor's story is, but that's sort of my take on.
And I think, you look at the voters of the West Ward of Newark, for example. They're looking at this ballot. They've got the county line, which is usually how people vote regardless, which includes a Newark candidate. And then opposing them is one guy from a fancier suburb several miles away who they've never really seen before. And that's just sort of like, what exactly is the pitch there? That was always going to be a tough sell for McGahey, but even with that tough sell, I'm not sure if he's really made it. I'm not sure if he's really put any of those kinds of feelers out that would be required to convince the voters of Irvington and Newark and Hillside that this guy from that suburb over there is really the one who should go to the legislature in place of the party endorsed candidates who are pretty much unobjectionable. I don't think there's any big problem that anyone has with Garnet Hall or Cleopatra Tucker.
No, this is we've talked about a lot before about the power of Maplewood and South Orange. Joey and I debated this at length about, I thought there was a scenario by which Mayor McGahey could win this if there was a huge turnout in Maplewood and South Orange and another crappy turnout showing in Newark. Cleopatra Tucker's never run there. She is, and I apologize. I don't mean this to be ageist, but she's 80 years old and has. You
just told us why that was young and
yeah. I know, but she's new to this area and has didn't get the Senate seat, didn't get the opportunity to move up to the Senate. They went with Renee Burgess, and I don't want to forget that Hillside is also in this district. That's new, and that's a place where I think the line's going to carry, but people have run, done that's not necessarily, a huge organization stronghold. The bottom line is I think Frank McGahey had started late. I think he, didn't have, it was based upon when Milo J.C. surprised everybody and decided not to run. I saw a scenario by which he and Garnet Hall would win South Orange and Maplewood, but he hasn't raised a lot of money, and look, this is unfortunately the state of affairs in New Jersey. He commutes to New York and he can only campaign nights and weekends, and he just hasn't put it together. I think he's a really good candidate, but he just wasn't able to put it together for this year. And he's,
one of the things that may be helpful to think about when you think about running against the line, we talk about the line as a shorthand, but you're really talking about when you're backed by an organization, there's a whole group of people who can do the different things that have to be done. That can, write a press release for you, that can put together a field operation for you, that can drive out voters for you. When you are just a candidate-centered campaign, raise the money for you, right? You've got to know how to do all those things yourself. And you've got to hit the ground running and do them immediately upon filing in the case of a primary. And you've got, 8 weeks to do it or something like that. So It's a really, really tough thing to do, and that's why more people don't do it. And I applaud anybody who runs for office. We need more of that, but it's a really tough thing to string all those skills together and actually execute on every one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just, this is likely to be an organization victory. I'll tell you one thing that I'm going to be watching in this election is what is the turnout in the Newark part of this district, and the New Jersey Globe has been sort of focused on this because Mayor Rasbaraka is looking at running for governor, and turnout in Newark over the last few elections has been awful. I mean, it's just been awful, and last year Maplewood plus South Orange plus Millburn was just about equal to the entire city of Newark and nowhere near it in population. And how many, we looked at single digit turnout in the Newark, municipal races. We looked at single digit turnout in school board races. There's a point where Baraka, as he moves about the state, saying, you should consider me as a serious candidate for governor. And I come with a base of the largest city in the state, and I won 75% of the vote there. You've got to. There's a point where he's got to show people that he can turn out votes, and I want to see if Cleopatra Tucker and the line candidates in Newark do any better this year, because he's ginning up an operation. Because it's at the end of the day, we keep it's a funny thing about time is every year you're 1 year more than it was in 2014, when he got elected mayor, and organizations atrophy, and I'm going to be looking at this race on turnout to see if Baraka is willing to show everybody that he knows how to turn out voters.
This is the argument that he'll make, is that we know how to turn it out when we need it, right? When we need it, we can turn it out. The problem with that argument is, look at what we're talking about when we talk about the Camden VBM machine, right? They are in the practice, the voters now, not just the organization, but their voters are in the practice of voting those ballots every single time. And that's the way you do it. And that's how you get lifelong voters. And that's how you get, in the absence of that, you can't just, one day wake everybody up and say, this is the election when we need you. They have to have had that habit all the way through. And they just don't at this point.
Yeah, as evidence with what I started with, which is Brian Stack running unopposed, is mobilizing his turning out machine tomorrow. You never know if there's going to be a pesky write-in or something, but and it should also be pointed out, as the mayor of Newark's largest city, Cleopatra Tucker is his, really the only one that is solidly part of his organization. Teresa Ruiz is her own, her own person always and forever, and very close to Joe D and to Leroy Jones, and Eliana Pinter Marine comes out of that, area, and Shanique Spite has her feet in both camps and comfortably, and, but Cleopatra Tucker is his legislator. He was not able to get her in the Senate. He didn't have the clout to do that. And so you say, we can do it when we need to, I don't know that he needs to, but what if Frank McGee had been, had more time and been able to put this together and raise money and did all the things that a successful off the line candidate has to do. They might have caught her. They may have caught Tucker asleep at the switch.
So mentioning Brian Stack, I think, segues us into sort of the final area of the state with legislative and county primaries. And I'll sort of talk about, I think we should maybe talk about all of them kind of as a unit. Hudson County is seeing a massive change of the guard this year. You've got huge shakeups in all three legislative districts. You've got the county executive, Tom DeGee's retiring. You got his chief of staff, Craig Guy, being the organization candidate to fill his spot. And you've got this not quite complete set of off the line Hudson progressives who run for things a lot in Hudson County, challenging various parts of this slate. You've got in the 31st legislative district, Sandra Cunningham has been absent from the Senate for a while. She's expected to be for the rest of her term.
Almost a year, yeah.
And Assemblywoman Angela McKnight is the choice to replace her. And then Jersey City Municipal Chairwoman Barbara McCann Stamato is the choice to replace her. So that's your slate in the 31st district. 32nd and 33rd districts also seeing a lot of turnover, but no one actually filed in the primary to run against them. So those primaries are non-existent. So it's really all concentrated in the 31st. You've got Michael Griffin, who is associated with local anti-organization people in Jersey City, as the Senate candidate in the 31st district. He's running with one running mate, Chanel Smith. And then I'm not going to name them all, but you've got, I believe, 6 county commissioner candidates plus a county executive candidate, Eliana Little, who are running for countywide office. So you've got this set of 9 candidates running off the line for these various offices against the might of the Hudson organization. Do any of them have what it takes? My suspicion is no, but I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, Craig, I am as optimistic about Craig Guy's winning this primary as I was about Dick Cody. I mean, he's been a power in that county. He's been running Tom DeGise's office. He's extraordinarily popular, and he's run. This is important. He's the favorite, no doubt. He was the favorite the moment that he emerged as the choice to succeed Tom DeGise, but he has taken nothing for granted. He's running a really, really strong campaign. He's got endorsements out there. He's raised a ton of money. Steve Fulop did a 6-figure ad buy for cable television in Hudson County just to prop that up. But Craig Guy has, he's sort of Stack-esque in the sense that he was going to win anyway, but he's run the kind of campaign as if he didn't believe it.
And remember, when Stack fires up his machine for his uncontested race, the other candidates that are running countywide are going to be the beneficiaries of that as well. So Craig, that's really the reason why you do this, because you transfer your strength to the rest of the ticket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is in my opinion, this is going to be a romp for the organization line, and it's interesting, right? Because this is you've got Steve Fulop running for governor, and he in 20 counties he is running as the progressive Democrat, but in Hudson County he's establishment. He's got the line. He is backing all the organization candidates. They're all going to win. They're mostly a lot of them are for him. This is I don't think there's going to be any drama in Hudson County. Anywhere, not even the East Newark mayoral primary, which was a big deal upset 4 years ago. I don't think there's anything going on there this year. I think it's just going to be good news for the organization.
Which, I'm not going to take any overly strong stance here, but it is a bit of a shame that the way that the system is set up in Hudson County, and this is true in most prominently in parts of South Jersey as well, that you have this huge turning of the guard. Is that even a phrase? Whatever. You've got a big shakeup. You've got Nick Sacco retiring. You've got Raj Mukherjee moving up to the Senate. You've got a bunch of new assembly candidates. You've got a bunch of open seats. You've got all redrawn commissioner seats up this year. And fundamentally, voters don't have much of a say. And I'm phrasing this carefully here because I don't want it to necessarily come across too strong, but it is very much like, this is a safe Democratic county. Republicans will not figure into the picture at all at any point. And this is a huge slate of candidates that is essentially being handed to voters. And the people who are running against them, as we've said on the stream before, praise everybody who runs. It's great for democracy when more people run for office. Most of them are not putting up the kinds of fights that they would need to win. And so that in its own way is not really giving voters that much of a choice. This is an area of the state that is growing. It's very diverse, and it has a lot of people who could run for office. It has a lot of the people who currently hold office who could definitely win in a campaign where they had an actual campaign against actual opponents who might beat them. But instead, you just sort of have, like, I saw on Twitter, I forget exactly who it was, someone saying, like, my district has been moved, or my home has been moved. I will be getting an entirely new legislative delegation next year, and I have no actual say in it. It is just what is happening because those are the people on my ballot, and that's who it'll be. And it's just kind of like, yeah, that is an unfortunate part of the New Jersey system that you can have that happen, I guess.
Yeah, and you've got, in downtown Jersey City and in Hoboken, you've got I would say an electorate that is at the high end of being an informed electorate.
Yeah.
These are people who pay attention to local politics. And
they elected Steve Fulop. And then when Steve Fulop became mayor, they elected someone who doesn't like Steve Fulop. They just keep on, they are the ones who are willing to buck the establishment in that.
So we'll see if that, that area of Jersey City is any closer in the county commissioner primary.
I forget which county commissioner race that is, but I think it is contested. So there will be at least a way of seeing how well the anti-establishment will do specifically in that race.
And we'll be able to measure that. And and Eliana Little ran for county commissioner 3 years ago, and she did the best of the unsuccessful group of progressives running. But you remember, you go back to 2020. Mayor Albio Ceres stack, whichever way you want to look at it. But he had a primary. He had a progressive challenger in the 20 primary. That drew the endorsement of the Working Families organization and some of the progressive groups. And those organizations didn't even get involved this year. They're just not. They're not playing for him. So
Working Families Party is backing Angela McKnight, so they're actually getting involved on the side of the organization in that one race.
Right. They are, and again, that's like the flip side of what we were talking about with Parker Space and Joe Panaccio. Ed Durr. It's not easy to be to the left of Angela McKnight. It's not easy to position yourself in a Democratic primary by saying Angela McKnight is a tool of the machine and not progressive enough. She's one of the most progressive legislators in Trenton. So, you have that challenge. And it all comes down to the fact that this is not, the other side is not well financed. They haven't really, they haven't really figured out how to win elections. They figured out how to run, but they haven't figured out how to win. And you've got Craig Guy, who is taking nothing for granted and running a very strong campaign.
Anything else to add, Micah?
Well, organizations can be toppled. It has been done in New Jersey, right? It's been done in Hudson County. Frank Hague was deposed, but it takes a Herculean effort. It takes the Kenny, machine coming in and replacing it, and so you need to see that level of effort. You need to see that level of engagement, that level of skill and ability and execution, and.
But the rebels, there's a long history here. The rebels who topple the machine become the machine. They don't remain the rebels. Albio Ceres was a gadfly showing up at West New York council meetings for years, railing against the machine.
So was Bob Menendez. Absolutely.
Bob Menendez, Nick Sackos, Steve Fulop, Richie Turner early in his career. These are all people. Brian Stack was anti-organization. So what happens is you can sometimes win, but when you do win, you become now you become the new leaders.
There's no incentive if you win as an anti-organization candidate. There's no incentive to remain an anti-organization candidate in office. All of the incentives are set up such that you take your part of the organization, you make it your own, and then you become part of the thing that you were railing against a year ago. There's no actual benefit to continuing to be like, if Steve Fulop, he won the mayor's race sort of as the anti-establishment candidate in 2013. If he had kept that stance in 2017, that would have gotten him nowhere. There would have been no point to that. So instead, he ran as the establishment candidate and he won in a landslide. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, think about, you get involved because you want to get things done, right? And so, having as many levers of power so that you can get things done is the objective, and you just were really good at it and you got it done. So, of course, you're going to take the power that you can take.
Yeah, you look at, I use East Newark, which is a tiny little town where Joe Smith, the mayor, he had been, I don't remember, he was mayor for a very long time. He was on the line, and Dina Grillo ran this off the line campaign. You don't need many votes to win in East Newark. She toppled him, and the very next day, the organization comes to East Newark and says, "Congratulations, mayor. Here's how things work in Hudson, and as a mayor, you join this very exclusive club of 13 that run things," and they brought her right in. They didn't. They said, "All right, you won fair and square. You won. Now you're part of our. We admit you into our club. You're part of the secret society." And Hudson has just been very good at doing that. The majority of Hudson County are people who at one time were on the outside looking in, and now they're on the inside protecting it.
So I'm looking at our clock here, and we are 2 hours and 20 minutes into this thing.
Yeah, we never do that, right?
I don't remember what our record is, but this is definitely going to push it, because we do want to still talk about some local primaries, and I think that the best way to do this, there are like 75 local primaries plus a few county.
Every one of them.
Yeah.
We are not going to talk about every one of them. Instead, what we were going to do is I'm going to call on one of you, and you are going to make the pitch for why people should pay attention to that local primary on Tuesday, even if it's not the town where they live or it's 100 miles away from them. So, David, what is your first pitch for a local primary to follow on Tuesday?
Well, my first pitch is I have not been following it, but more importantly, I can't believe that our friend Matt Friedman has not noticed that in one of the wards in Atlantic City where Hossein Morshed, under indictment for fraud, is facing a primary challenge from a man who is on the ballot as George Animal Crouch. How did Matt Friedman miss the fact that there is a candidate on the ballot who calls himself Animal? And Matt's going to have to explain that to everybody in the future that this is, you want to talk about a guy who will give Friedman pleasure over the next 4 years writing headlines in Playbook. It's if George Animal Crouch wins. And by the way, George Animal Crouch on the organization line against a guy who is under indictment for fraud, he ought to win. So we'll see.
Atlantic City, actually, it has 5 of its 6 wards have contested primaries. It is, none of them are races that I have followed closely. I think that you should not listen to basically anything we say about them other than the funness of George Animal Crouch. You should probably go to the Press of Atlantic City and learn about the races from them. But it's definitely, Atlantic City is less big than some people think. It's only about 40,000 people, but it is the hub of an entire region of the state. It is an important city economically. It is an important city culturally. So the outcomes of these races are going to be pretty important. I just can't speak to them really. But you've got a couple of incumbents running off the line. It's all interesting stuff. Okay, Micah, what's your first pitch?
In the same vein and in the same region, but moving to the other side of the water, Camden City has 4 ward races, and they are all contested by progressive Democrats. This would have been unthinkable just a few short years ago, but we all know about the contraction of the South Jersey Democratic machine. one of the candidates in particular, Arthur Barkley, former member of the assembly who left the assembly, resigned because of domestic violence problems that he had. And so it was too controversial for the state legislature, but not, I guess, too controversial for the city council race. So we'll see whether or not the renegades can displace anybody in the city of Camden. It would be obviously a real upset in the heart of the Camden machine, but they are feeling their oats in that city right now.
You've also got an incumbent in one of the wards running off the line. She and a couple of other incumbents rebelled against the organization. Her two allies aren't running for re-election. I guess they just didn't even think that they could come close. But one of them, let me get her name up, Marilyn Torres, Ward 3, running for re-election. So we'll see whether her incumbency matters at all. I mean, if you look at I tweeted about this a couple of days ago. If you look at the ballots in the city of Camden, they are rough for the anti-organization people. You've got some anti-organization county-wide candidates in column A. That's Kate Delaney and Sam Sweet. Camden progressives run off-the-line county commissioner candidates basically every year, never really win. Probably do a little bit better this year because they've got column A, but it's not a recipe for success. You've got organization column B. You've got a completely empty column C, which, County Clerk Joe Ripa could have easily filled that. He didn't. It's because of a primary in Lindenwold where there's stuff in column C and D. And then column D, you've got one lonely council candidate. Each ward is a different one, just sitting there. So voters are going to have to struggle to find those off-the-line candidates.
And look, it makes me, this makes me feel old because, I remember an era where, assemblyman punches a woman in the face, you don't come back from that. Right. And Arthur Barkley, I mean, if he wins, it harkens back to Senator Torricelli. When did we become such an unforgiving people? Well, apparently in Camden, they will lead the state in being forgiven. So,
which is, I mean, I don't know a ton about this race, but it really feels like a headache that they didn't really need to have here. Like their choice of candidate there. I'm not sure if we'd be talking about Camden except in broad strokes if it weren't for that particular choice. There's oftentimes off the line challenges in Camden. That's not uncommon. We might briefly mention them because it's a big city, but his presence on the ballot makes it a race that people are going to pay attention to. And presuming that he will most likely win, then they've got him as a councilman. And then that's always a thing that they have. And so I don't really get that choice. There's obviously internal dynamics going on there that are leading to this. But it just strikes me as something that is causing them headlines that they don't need to have. So my first
serious enough problem that he left the legislature to begin with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And didn't tell anybody for weeks. I wasn't there for that, but reading those old articles, it's kind of crazy. So my first pitch, staying in South Jersey-ish area for Race to Follow, is I believe the largest town, second largest town that has a contested primary this year, and that's Toms River. So you got Mayor Mo Hill, who's running for re-election. He has the line, which is actually something of an upset. He is not at all friendly with County Chairman, County GOP guy, George Gilmore, who is famous for all sorts of reasons. But at the Ocean County Convention, there's a whole bunch of complicated rules within the Ocean GOP, but basically his Toms River Club won a vote to not decertify them. And that tangle of a sentence means that he has the line. Jerry Ambrosio, who is a Gilmore ally who's run for legislature before, is seemingly his main opponent, but there's also a third candidate in the race, Councilman Dan Roderick, who is running a third slate. All three of these people have full 3-member council slates. There's a fourth guy too, whose name I have forgotten, but he could serve as a spoiler. A chaotic race, and there's some really sort of complex and a little bit gross dynamics of the Jewish community in Toms River, where towns near Lakewood, Jewish development, Orthodox Jewish development and zoning issues have become like the top local issue. And Mo Hill is very much making one of his key pitches. We are, he codes it more than this, but we are putting we are halting or at least slowing the development in the Orthodox community in Lakewood, in Toms River. That is a big part of his pitch. And it adds sort of an uncomfortable thing to this primary. I'm not really sure how voters react. Ambrosio has tried to turn it around into well, that's anti-Semitic and you should welcome all of our town and yada, yada. I don't know whether that's going to register. I don't know whether Tom's River voters are going to be more motivated by that argument or whether they're going to be more motivated by the argument of, yeah, sure, we don't like anti-Semitism, but also we don't like the way that this development is progressing and we're still going to vote for Hill.
Well, you just said
Really?
a mouthful. That's something that many voters in Tom's River and in the areas surrounding Lakewood have convinced themselves that it is possible to both be fair-minded towards somebody's religious beliefs and be against the overdevelopment. So they don't view this as a bigoted view that they're holding. And so I think it's a very powerful message that Hill is playing with and toying with and, probably crossing the line with, but it's one that has a lot of appeal.
Yeah. And there's nothing anti-Semitic about Admiral Mo Hill, and most certainly not his political consultant Art Gallagher, who's one of the smartest guys in the state when it comes to running these kind of races. Gilmore is very good at this also. And this is why I agree with you, Joey. We really have to watch that. I'll say this quickly. If you're watching this at 11 o'clock at night and you're sticking to the Tom's River race, my guess is you don't need the certification, decertification issue explained. You already know about it. So
I don't know. Even for us junkies, that whole vote, I had to triple check when I was at the convention. Like, wait, am I writing this right? Because they just said that the new club that is actually the current club wasn't defeated by the old club in the vote where you had to vote yes on approving the rules that would have decertified it. What?
Makes perfect sense to me. It really does.
Yeah.
So. But I'm
not getting
more at the Ocean County age than you guys are. So.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to make this comment about Ocean County. We won't get into more specifics, but town by town, you're seeing the residual effects of this chairman fight, the fight in the party, and you're seeing just this propensity among the Republican Party to produce more candidates over this battle for the heart and the soul of the party. So you're seeing just Plumstead's got knockdown dragout fights. Point Pleasant has knockdown dragouts. Beechwood. So it's town after town more than anywhere else in the state, I think.
By the way, that's no apologies. That's how it should be when you are in a one-party town, Democrat or Republican. Then primaries are the whole ball game. So there should be primaries.
Absolutely,
it shouldn't be easy in a primary and non-competitive in general.
Yeah. But that's what it is in, frankly, most towns.
Yeah.
So, David, I know that you want to talk about Roselle. Pitch us on Roselle. Tell us.
I do. But I don't want to. I'll only say this quickly. I'm going to be watching county committee races in Edison, where Mayor Sam Joshi is looking to take control of the party away from Mahesh Bhatia, who he beat in the primary 2 years ago. So, it doesn't get any more local than watching county committee fights. And that's an important one. So
there's also, just quickly to add on to that, there is a contested council election there too, where the local Democratic committee controlled by Mahesh Bhatia endorsed 4 candidates. The county Democratic Party agreed with him, I think, on 2 of them and then ditched the other 2. And so you've got this sort of odd Frankenstein slate there with a couple of incumbents, a couple of newcomers. And we'll see. There's not going to be any super clear conclusions that are going to be drawn from that for those reasons. But it is still going to be interesting to see how that race shakes out. I
agree. So let's talk about Roselle. Maybe we could, unless anybody else has any others, maybe we could end with Roselle. But
I'll throw in a couple more just as sort of a litany when you're done. Yeah. But yes, pitch us on Roselle.
So this is a place, and Jamel Holley was the mayor of Roselle before he went to the assembly. He gave up the assembly seat. I think he may have been, on a course to lose the line anyway, but he mounted an off the line challenge to Joe Cryan. He did not do very well at all. Cryan Cryan, strong in Union and Elizabeth, beat him, with something like 60% of the vote. But Holly won Roselle, and he's running against a guy named Donald Shaw, who is now running for his first full term. He had won an unexpired race. I'm hearing from both sides. They're sort of expecting. It's no sure thing, but pretty good chance that Holly is going to take this. And this is a former assemblyman returning to local office. It'll be the second time this year that a former assemblyman is running for mayor. The first being Albio Ceres, but this is a tough race, and this is what I think is going to be an interesting narrative of this race if Holly wins. I don't know if he is or he isn't, because again, there's no polling. It's just anecdotal stuff that you hear. But if Jamel Holly wins, what this means is that a supporter of Robert Kennedy Jr. for president against a sitting president of the United States might be winning a mayoral primary in a place where you only need to win the primary to be elected mayor. And Jamel Holly was in Boston. He was the first speaker on the stage at RFK Jr.'s announcement, and I think it's interesting. Not consequential. Doesn't mean that Joe Biden is going to lose Roselle in the Democratic primary next year, but it would be an interesting story out of New Jersey on election night if a high-profile anti-vaccine Democrat who is supporting Robert Kennedy Jr. wins that primary against the organization.
Yeah, but it would be a misread to think that voters were voting on the basis of his vaccine views, right? It would be he'd win in spite of those.
No, this is all politics is local.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's done well there.
Exactly. An amazing story. Life after death, life after political death. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, I think this is, I think for me, this may be one of the, the biggest races to watch in the States.
And it's certainly one of the biggest races to watch in the state relative to its population. Roselle, it's a surprisingly name brand town, but it's actually quite small. It doesn't have that many people.
Right.
It's outnumbered by most other towns in Union County, but it has this sort of hold. And it definitely, the results of this sort of random mayoral primary will, for a lot of different reasons, they'll be well known. They'll be publicized. We'll publicize it. We'll write stories about it. It's
everybody in Union County politics is on the edge of their seats with this one for sure.
Right. And look, you have two senators who are don't necessarily like each other. They've been getting along very well, and that's Senate President Nick Scutari and Joe Cryan. But they are united on this one. So this isn't a race against a splintered organization. This is a race against a united organization. We're still talking about a potential win there. And last weekend, Brian Stack brought a couple hundred people down to canvass to show his support for Scutari and Cryan. So what happens here, the reality, it's not really about Kennedy and a sudden surge of his supporters winning office. It's more, I think, about the fact that you have Jamel Holly, who is young, is launching a pretty, potentially a pretty quick comeback. And that means that, he's going to occupy that mayoral spot until there's another opportunity for him to come back.
And he's a threat. He's a threat to the organization. Yeah.
Okay, Mike,
if you listen to Jamel Holly, what he said to me is that he doesn't have any beef with Joe Cryan. He doesn't have any beef with Nick Scutari. The only guy he's got a beef with is Donald Shaw. So I think it's going to be very interesting.
Which is the right framing for a guy who wants to defy the inevitable victories or likely inevitable victories of everyone else in the county.
Yeah.
to cast his race as this is me versus this guy. Vote on our race.
Yeah.
Great.
Micah, do you have any last local pitches?
No, I'm going to leave it to you. No.
Okay, I've in the time since David started talking, I've collected 4. So very quickly, Pompton Lakes, we already kind of mentioned that one. The incumbent mayor was kicked off the line. That'll be interesting in its own right. There's a few other races, like Mullica is one. Carney's Point, I think, is another. Whatever. There's a few other races where the incumbent is kicked off the line, and that's always an interesting primary, because being an incumbent gives you, like, that just makes the race notable kind of on its own. And it gives you, especially in these local races where you might genuinely have very high name recognition because it's just your neighbors, like, that makes it a real race. And in Pompton Lakes, it's especially interesting because that could boost Tom Mastrangelo, as we mentioned before. We'll see whether there's sort of an up ballot effect where people are voting for their incumbent mayor, and thus that means something farther up the ballot. There is an interesting primary that's just something I've never really seen before, although I admit I haven't been doing this for too long, in Marlborough, where you've got a Democratic mayor who's running for re-election and a couple of Democratic council incumbents, and the Republican primary to take them on looks very competitive. And the reason for that is that there's a split between the county party, who's backing one slate, and then the 3 incumbent Republican council members who flipped seats a couple years ago, who are backing another slate. And the other slate is very much running as that ticket. They're running as team of DiNuzzo, Millman, and Kazi, which are the 3 Republicans that just won. And I don't know too much about the race beyond that. I just find that a really fascinating dynamic where you've got these local Republican winners who like one slate and the overall county Republican Party who likes another, and will sort of, and none of them are guaranteed to win. You know, they're running against Democratic incumbents. So that'll be, we'll revisit this one in November. We have Dover, which every election in Dover is an interesting election in Dover. There's always these incredibly complex internecine battles. You've got Ed Correa, who's a former municipal chairman or current municipal chairman. I honestly cannot keep it straight. Current, yeah. He has not always made friends, but he is the organization line pick for mayor. He's running his own slate of council candidates. Former Mayor James Dodd is running, and he's running his own slate. And then current Mayor Carolyn Blackman is running, and she's got one council running mate. And there's county commissioner or county committee candidates as well. I can't forecast this at all, but I do know that it's clearly competitive. It's clearly an interesting race. Dover has seen a lot of changes recently. The defeat of Dodd in 2019 was a sign that the town was moving on from its roots and moving towards because it's a Hispanic majority town. And that was a big shift in town politics when that Hispanic majority started flexing its political muscle and electing a lot of Hispanic candidates to office. And so this Dodd comeback bid is sort of a test of how far that's really gone.
Well, I mean, you know, Dover is just I think just a little bit under 70% Hispanic. If Ed Correa wins, he'd become the first Hispanic mayor in history there. And I'm not sure how to call this other than the fact that I think the incumbent is coming in third there. She just has not built an organization and didn't get the support of the same people that put her there the last time. So, what'll be interesting is again, we talk about the year of the asterisk, and that is, how will it be explained that a town that is just about 70% Hispanic rejects a Hispanic candidate for a white former mayor? I think that'll be, there'll be a lot of, there'll be a lot of questions about that, at some point.
And I think a big factor in that, if that does happen, will be turnout.
Yeah.
Hispanic voters pretty much always have lower turnout than white voters. And that's especially bad in primaries, since that's especially bad in off-year primaries where there's not really anything else on the ballot of note. And so you have to imagine if Dodd is winning with like 35 to 30% plurality, then one of the inevitable takes is, well, a big part of this, a big cause of this is likely that Hispanic voters just did not turn out at the same rate as the town's white minority. But we'll see. We'll see what actually happens.
And by the way, it should be said that Mayor, James P. Dodd is not without support in the Hispanic community.
Right. That is definitely true. He was mayor while the town was majority Hispanic. It's not like that's a sudden shift.
And Eddie, like you said, Eddie Correa is strong and has shown he can win, but he's ruffled a few feathers, and there's an entire faction of the party there that is not for him.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
And then the final primary, and this is purely just because people who follow these things closely will like to see the return of an old name. Lauren Dayton, who is a Tenafly councilwoman who ran with Valerie Venneri Huddle off the line in 2021. That race seems to have cost her. She was kicked off the line for re-election, and she's running off the line against another incumbent and the party choice. So this is just sort of, I thought that was interesting as this kind of ripple effect from that 2021 primary where Venneri Huddle and her slate challenged the Bergen machine, did pretty terribly, and now one of the members of that slate is sort of feeling the consequences. And we'll see whether, I don't know whether she has enough of a local brand to overcome that. I don't know what her reputation is in Tenafly, but it's a primary worth watching just purely because of her history in Bergen County. And that's all I got.
Do we think that there's certainly seems like there's the potential for inroads again for the Gloucester County Republicans down ballot if things are happening up ballot for them, right? We think their local
races, or
the Republicans have contested races for commissioner. Well, they're both the Republicans and the Democrats have 2 slates each running for commissioner this time.
Right.
So clearly they think this is going to be it's a control election again, right? So, they're watching this
Gloucester
closely.
will probably be the most closely watched county level race in 2023, just the same as it was in 2022. Any closing thoughts?
It's 11:15. I want to thank everybody who's stuck with us, through this, and it's if you're still watching it, and so many people watch it in sections too, and get through it, it's this is just what makes New Jersey a great state to watch politics in, because here we are, 2019. This is supposed to be the off year of the off years, and we've got 75 contested local races and some really hot legislative races, and New Jersey just never disappoints. It's never dull, and we're all grateful for it.
Absolutely. I always tell my students, if you want to work in a state where there's elections every year, this is the place for you.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And so we have the interest, inside our bubble, and we just, we need to see if actually my late friend Bob Franks used to say that, the most, that's all fine. All these things, all these discussions, all these tactics are fine as long as you get some of those things we call votes. And without the votes, you don't win.
So I was talking with a friend on Memorial Day, who she lives in West Windsor, and on the West Windsor ballot this year, it's truly nothing. There was going to be a county executive primary between Dan Benson and Brian Hughes, but Brian Hughes dropped out. Nothing for legislature, nothing for local races. It's going to be a one slate ballot. And her question very reasonably was, should I vote? And I think that is a genuine question that people are going to be asking, is in a lot of these towns, in a lot of these districts, there's not much to vote for. But I think the right answer is still, yeah.
There was a very spirited behind the scenes race among the Democrats for which organization, which slate in West Windsor was going to get support. Tirza Weirman ran with a group that did not prevail. The other organization slate prevailed, but behind the scenes, they actually did have quite a rival, and it was not a nasty thing. It was a friendly thing, but it was a direction of the party. Which direction should we go in? So the answer to whether you should vote is, I think the politics in West Windsor are pretty spirited. It just so happens that decisions have been made. So if you want to be a part of them, then you need to vote and you need to be a part of the process so that you can, weigh in on which slate your party should support.
I think that's the right take.
So tell her to vote, and if she's still not convinced, have Micah call her.
She didn't need much convincing.
Yeah,
she's not one of the people who really needs convincing in New Jersey. There
are big issues in West Windsor. Talk about development and warehouses. There are very big issues about the future of that town going on right now.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, did not mean to derail it to West Windsor politics specifically, but it has now been almost 2 hours and 49 minutes. We are tired. You are tired, but it's all been fun. And I think that this has been a great talk. And I'm in a good position to say so because I did it. And I would never lie about myself. So thank you to David. Thank you to Micah. Thank you to everybody who stuck it out for this entire time. And we'll see how things go on Tuesday. We'll see whether we have the biggest egg on our face in our lives.
It happened to us last year, so
We really did.
we'll see. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.